In just a few days, Tobago will be transformed into the carnival capital of the Caribbean. But before the streets come alive, the action kicks off in the Tobago House with the 34th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has announced that the Constitution Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament. Therefore, Minority Leader Kelvon Morris will lay a motion seeking support for the unobstructed passage of these bills, as he feels Tobago will benefit from their enactment. But how do your representatives feel about these bills? There's only one way to find out. The House will warm things up on Thursday, October 24th from 10 a.m. with a heated debate. You can either come in or tune in. Either way, don't miss it. In just a few days, Tobago will be transformed into the carnival capital of the Caribbean. But before the streets come alive, the action kicks off in the Tobago House with the 34th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has announced that the Constitution Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament. Therefore, Minority Leader Kelvon Morris will lay a motion seeking support for the unobstructed passage of these bills, as he feels Tobago will benefit from their enactment. But how do your representatives feel about these bills? There's only one way to find out. The House will warm things up on Thursday, October 24th from 10 a.m. with a heated debate. You can either come in or tune in. Either way, don't miss it. In just a few days, Tobago will be transformed into the carnival capital of the Caribbean. But before the streets come alive, the action kicks off in the Tobago House with the 34th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has announced that the Constitution Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament. Therefore, Minority Leader Kelvon Morris will lay a motion seeking support for the unobstructed passage of these bills as he feels Tobago will benefit from their enactment. But how do your representatives feel about these bills? There's only one way to find out. The House will warm things up on Thursday, October 24th from 10 a.m. with a heated debate. You can either come in or tune in. Either way, don't miss it. In just a few days, Tobago will be transformed into the carnival capital of the Caribbean. But before the streets come alive, the action kicks off in the Tobago House with the 34th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has announced that the Constitution Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament. Therefore, Minority Leader Kelvon Morris will lay a motion seeking support for the unobstructed passage of these bills as he feels Tobago will benefit from their enactment. But how do your representatives feel about these bills? There's only one way to find out. The House will warm things up on Thursday, October 24th from 10 a.m. with a heated debate. You can either come in or tune in. Either way, don't miss it. In just a few days, Tobago will be transformed into the carnival capital of the Caribbean. But before the streets come alive, the action kicks off in the Tobago House with the 34th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has announced that the Constitution Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament. Therefore, Minority Leader Kelvon Morris will lay a motion seeking support for the unobstructed passage of these bills as he feels Tobago will benefit from their enactment. But how do your representatives feel about these bills? There's only one way to find out. The House will warm things up on Thursday, October 24th from 10 a.m. with a heated debate. You can either come in or tune in. Either way, don't miss it. In just a few days, Tobago will be transformed into the carnival capital of the Caribbean. But before the streets come alive, the action kicks off in the Tobago House with the 34th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has announced that the Constitution Tobago Self-Government Bill and the Tobago Island Government Bill will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament. Therefore, Minority Leader Kelvon Morris will lay a motion seeking support for the unobstructed passage of these bills as he feels Tobago will benefit from their enactment. But how do your representatives feel about these bills? There's only one way to find out. The House will warm things up on Thursday, October 24th from 10 a.m. with a heated debate. You can either come in or tune in.
Thank you for bearing with us. Secretary Pantin, you may continue your presentation.
I know some of the members, they are hoping that I start from the beginning. But I'll continue from where I left off. So I just want to reiterate what I said before. In the beginning of clause 7.3, that there are more than 43 exceptions of powers that cannot be exercised by the director in Tobago, despite those same powers being available for the director in Trinidad. So we were mentioning the 43, going through the 43 exceptions. So I'll continue, right? To require operators to have mobile transceiver units, clauses 151, to be responsible for the administration of the Observer Program, which is a collection of all information related to the fisheries industry, clause 163, to have supervision over the observers, clauses 165 and 167, approval for Trinidad and Tobago vessels to operate beyond national jurisdiction, clause 170, to deal with prior declarations to use identified ports or designated landing sites or a specific area, including to give permission or address offenses for persons using a port without permission, clauses 171 to 173, the ability to inspect vessels without notice at an identified port, designated landing or specified area in the fishery waters, or an area beyond national jurisdiction, clause 175, to recommend to the Minister for operators of foreign vessels to enter or use an identified port, designated landing or specified area, or to recommend the written approval, clauses 177 or 178, to recommend written approval for departure of foreign fishing vessels from an identified port, designated landing or specified area, clause 183, issuing a fixed penalty notice, clause 185, giving evidence in proceedings, clause 194, to give a certificate that can be used as evidence for the location of a vessel, clause 196, to give evidence obtained through an electronic device, clause 198.5, creating and maintaining registers and records, clause 209, and to vary the licenses and permits under the repealed legislation to ensure compliance.
Assemblyman Pantin, one moment, please.
Is this the bill that the Assemblyman?
Correct.
Okay.
Madam Presiding Officer, the minority leader, he was absent when we began the discussion. So he would be lost. Well, he's usually lost. So that isn't different for this situation.
Member.
The exceptions in clause 7.3 results in the Director of Tobago being a passive spectator to the new powers established under the bill. The Director in Tobago's position is limp compared to the Director of Fisheries in Trinidad. So you see, Madam Presiding Officer, you see Tobago, the PNM government, they are giving you the appearance of control, but legally you do not have control over your own affairs in Tobago. As it stands, we in Tobago cannot determine how we manage our own fish stocks and who can fish within our waters to our own detriment. That is why I cannot support the original motion to accept less than what we presently have. Thank you.
Assemblyman Duke, you may now join this debate.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Colleagues, thank you for being present. To the people of Roxborough, Argyle, Dallaford, Louisdorf, Betsiope, etc., I'm very thankful for your vote of confidence. It's now 8 years since, 8 it is? Well, yeah, I think it is. Since representing the people of that area. And I must say special congratulations to our champion, Verse. He gave them some good verse last night, and he's from Roxborough. So I'm very proud of the book. Well done. And I wish to respond to my colleague, the member from Wim. Wim it is. So many different names. Wim, Spring, Darrell Spring, etc. I wish to respond to him by saying that the idea of us as Tobago recognizing the constitutional amendment bill is a good idea. But just what it is, what this constitutional amendment bill is, what it is that Tobago desire, I will try in the next few moments to make it absolutely clear to all and sundry what Tobagonians desire and what the bill provides. Allow me to make an apology for my colleague, the Assemblyman from Speyside, Castara. He's not here today. He would have chose to participate in a brainstorming session for educational practitioners somewhere in the back hill of Sao Paulo, while he allows people to deal with the challenges. I would to God he was here, Madam Presiding Officer, because in 2023 he would have committed to represent autonomy issue. And I believe if he was here, he would not have sanctioned some of the child's play that is what took place here within this August House. But nevertheless, he's not here, and so I have a responsibility to call the House to order at this point in time. House is in session. Madam Presiding Officer, what Tobago desire is not autonomy, but self-determination. Let that soak in for a while. Tobago does not desire autonomy. Tobago desires self-determination. Autonomy speaks of a measure of rights. We want a measure of rights. Tobago does not want a measure of rights. Tobago wants all, A-L-L, all its rights. If I'm to say to you this, as Tobagonians, we understand through past medium knowledge where we came from. We came from a place in the 1700s, 1769, when Tobago operated under the old representative system. It was a system of governance where there was a lower house and an upper house. What my colleagues are introducing today is nothing new. Donkey years, it was there before. Tobagonians don't want that. We had it already. So Tobago enjoyed in the 1700s a bicameral system, a lower house and a upper house. Tobago enjoyed in the 1700s an electoral system, or system by which representatives were elected. Yes, there were about 15 representatives then, and they represented Tobago on all aspects. If you want to understand what autonomy was or what self-determination was, it was what Tobago had back then. You see, back then in the 1700s, right up to 1876, those that occupied the Legislative Assembly, they had what we now call the right to impose taxes, levies, create laws. Tobago enjoyed its own constitution. Yeah. Tobago had its own general hospital, its own surgeon. Tobago had its own commissioner of police. Do not call that name. Tobago had its own chief justice, and there are many buried on the island here. Now what we have today is the result of a vendetta that someone in the past had against Tobago. In 1876, when the Belmano riot took place, Tobago was actually under the control of the working class. And the executive that governed Tobago at that time in the House of Assembly were unable to restore law and order. And for that reason, and that reason alone, Queen Victoria went 3 months thereafter and repealed the executive powers of the Tobago House of Assembly. Let me break it down just a bit for educational purposes. On the 1st of May, 1876, a riot took place in the village of Roxborough. That's right, where we came from, you know. We don't take nonsense, we fight back. And what happened after that, 3 months later, the Queen of England repealed the executive powers of the Assembly in the Tobago Constitution, thereby creating a crown colony rule. The riot took place in May, and the executive powers was repealed in August of that same year. From that moment to now, Madam Presiding Officer, Tobago has been grappling with England, the colonial powers, Trinidad, to get back to where it was as a country with self-determination. But even though, and let me just back. After that, the next wicked piece of legislature that affected Tobagonians drastically was in 1887. Mark those numbers down as good students. It will help you with your history lessons. In 1887, the Queen then moved to the Parliament of England. And she said, let's join the British colony of Tobago with the colony of Trinidad. And thereby, for the first time, we have what is called Trinidad and Tobago. It is that piece of legislation that governs the relationship Trinidad and Tobago. However, there was a caveat. And she said, look, to the House, allow me some little room here. I will determine at a later date the terms and conditions by which this Trinidadian relationship will go by. She said that. And so therefore, in 1898, plenty numbers, mark it down, and all right. 1898, around November, the Queen moved to create the terms by which Tobago and Trinidad operated by. You see, in 1887, they moved the Treasury, they moved a certain thing, and it was Trinidad and Tobago, one country. But in 1898, that year, something different happened. Tobago was made a ward of Trinidad and Tobago. Tobago is not a ward of Trinidad, mind you. Tobago is a ward of Trinidad and Tobago. You see, there's no such a place called Trinidad anymore. From the time they created the Trinidad and Tobago Act, there was no place called Trinidad after that. Legally, you can search high, you can search low, there's no place called Trinidad. There's a place called Trinidad and Tobago, and that is represented by the island of Trinidad. However, Tobago has been defined in that council, order of council document that says Tobago become a ward of Trinidad and Tobago. If we have to deal with self-determination, we must go back and understand our position. So when they came in this document and they said we are going to just repeal the status of ward of Tobago, it is not what Tobago wants. Tobago wants a nullification and a rewriting of the Trinidad and Tobago Act. That old act, that called Trinidad and Tobago Act, that was done by the British colonial masters, that must be repealed and replaced. That's what we want. That's what Tobago wants. And it must be done so that there could be a level of fairness. Fairness between the island of Tobago and the island of Trinidad. Somewhere in this document, when the committee was looking through it, in the preamble, the state preamble is under section 4 of the Constitution. If anyone understands what a preamble is, it is a story before the story. All right? So before you get to the real story, that is the story. But that story has no real weight. It is simply there to help you to understand the story when you get to it. So in the preamble, they say that Tobago should be given the right to self-determination. That Tobago should, among its own people, determine, among its own people, its political status, yeah, and its own economic, social, and cultural development. This is what the United Nations call the right to self-determination, a cardinal principle rooted in international law. It's not a friendly gesture. Tobago, unlike the other Caribbean nations, never had the opportunity to exercise its own self-determination. According to the law, any single island that was held under subjugation by a colonial power must have the right, after 1962, around there, to determine for itself its own political status. When we say political status, Tobago has the right among itself to determine whether we want to be in a relationship with Trinidad at all. That is our right. We must determine that. And the Constitution acknowledges that in section 4 of the preamble. We must determine among ourselves whether we want to form an association with the Eastern Caribbean countries or whether we want to just be fully independent. Tobago must decide that. And so far, Madam Presiding Officer, Tobago has not yet decided that. But what we have in this document here is a position that Trinidad is telling us, come and sign this. Put it to a print here, I'll give you a little more money. Even when we look at the money, what money is that? They're offering us 6.9% when the dispute resolution, somewhere around 2000, around the 2001, would have offered us some 6.9%. They are offering 6.8 in 2024. It is not what Tobago wants. Madam Presiding Officer, they said they're going to give us lawmaking powers. What lawmaking powers inside of this? There is no lawmaking powers for Tobago. They say we could form the Tobago Act. In the current Tobago House of Assembly Act, there is something called assembly laws, which we could already make. But we are not making assembly laws. No one has ever, except the former Chief Secretary, Mr. Overlondon. He attempted to. But even his own government dismissed him as being unrealistic when he presented the Tobago Police Bill. Imagine that. And now they are saying to you, you can make Tobago laws, call it Tobago Act. And these laws will have weight as long as it does not conflict with the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. But as I already established, there is no place called Trinidad. Trinidad is now Trinidad and Tobago is now by itself as a ward of Trinidad. Madam Presiding Officer, may I make it more clear to you? Tobago is an oxymoron. Tobago cannot be a ward of itself. Yeah? Tobago can best be described as the little finger of the little finger. Anybody knows that at all? Madam Presiding Officer, have you ever seen the little finger has a little finger? It's a kind of weird thing, right? Abnormality. So what we have in the Trinidad and Tobago relationship is called an abnormality, where Tobago is a ward of itself. And they are saying that they will just repeal that part of it. No. As long as we cannot make laws without those laws being vetted by Trinidad, we are still a ward. We cannot borrow money internationally. We must go to Trinidad, and they must give us permission to borrow money internationally. Our executive cannot even govern, even they say you can govern here. Because what you are governing can only be in respect to Trinidad. So Trinidad sets the bar and tell them, come and accept this. Tobago does not want that. What Tobago wants is a resetting of the match. We want to have the Trinidad and Tobago Act of 1887 fully repealed and replaced. It must be replaced with what is fair, what is decent, and what is just. There must be no Trinidad and Tobago, and then Tobago being a little part of the little finger. No. Tobago must be Tobago, and Trinidad must be Trinidad. And no, it must not be the colonial powers that bring us together, but we must come together based on a meeting of minds, based on a bringing of our assets, our natural resources, and say, let's partner together to build a better country. That's what we want. We're not preaching separatism. We're not preaching, next we'll call it secession. We are preaching togetherness, but it must be done the right way. So I reject the idea of just passing this bill, and it's a good bill. This bill undermines what our foreparents was fighting for. This bill is a slap in the face. They didn't fight and die for Tobago that will hitch up under Trinidad arm as if we are roll on. We don't want that. We want to be Tobago, and Tobago must be defined as Tobago, and Trinidad must be defined as Trinidad. The only way to do that is to repeal that colonial act, not even the Constitution. Repeal that, and the island of Tobago and the island of Trinidad must now be defined. You see, when they made Tobago a ward of Trinidad, it was simply an amendment to the Trinidad and Tobago Act. All right? And we need to understand that. It was simply an amendment. And so once they repeal the act, they repeal all of that, and they could fix all of that then. That is what is destroying us. Even in this document, they are treating us as a ward. Why can't we have financial freedom as Grenada, Barbados, St. Vincent? Why can't we have legislative freedom as Barbados, Grenada, St. Vincent? Why is it that the Chief Justice must determine what is good law and order in Tobago? No, shouldn't happen at all. Why Trinidad must look over our shoulders? We do not want that, Madam Presiding Officer. I do not want to go much further. I think I've explained to Tobago what we want and what they are presenting. But let me say this today. I look at my colleagues on the other side, and a lot is lacking. You cannot amend a motion without clarity. Just amend it for amending's sake. I sat and I tried to ask myself, what Tobago is benefiting from this discussion? And we're hearing all types of outer timing talk. And it's not focused on the bill. People going to tongue, they're straying away. Yeah? Because that's what they do, distract. Listen to me, Madam Presiding Officer, we have had a political revolution in December 2021. The minds of the people have changed. Their appetite have changed. They do not have an appetite for foolishness again. Tobagonians do not have the appetite for that. Tobagonians want to hear, what are you doing about the thing you promised? So when my good friend gone off and he's participating in some brainstorming course for teaching practitioners and leaving Tobago to waddle, they are marking that down. Now is a serious time. Every single Tobagonian must understand we want to have a reset. Leave the constitutional amendments for now. Let us go back and let us repeal that 1887 Trinidad and Tobago Act and all the amendments subsequent to that, and let's create now Trinidad and Tobago, Tobago and Trinidad. Do you know, in the early 1900s, when you see a dollar, at the back of the dollar, there was a symbol for Tobago and a symbol for Trinidad. Yeah? They replaced all of that, and they say the symbol for Tobago now is the cocky crow, a pest. A pest. And in more than one ways, they treat us as a pest. They say, oh gosh, they are doing not only come in and ask, we don't want. This is how they have relegated us to. Instead of trying to address those issues, they want to address three ships. Again, we have no say in that, because the votes are stacked against us. It's 39 votes to 2. And in the cases where these votes have aligned themselves with people in Trinidad, it's really all 41 seats in Trinidad. Because there's no independent vote in Tobago that says, look, this is what Tobago wants, and we are not supporting that. I beg, Madam Presiding Officer, this August House will look beyond this amendment and let's get to the root cause. We are only discussing the symptoms here. We need to address the root cause, which is the fundamental thing that caused Trinidad and Tobago to join. Repeal that bill, and let's replace it with good bill. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Assemblyman Sampson. You may now join this debate.
Madam Presiding Officer, again, I thank you for the opportunity to address this August House. I also want to thank the electoral district of Bonaccord and Crown Point for their confidence in me to represent them. Today, I stand before you to address an issue that has long been the center of our island's struggle for justice and equity, our right to self-determination. I know sometimes I have to pinch myself because this is 2024, and we are still here with no signs of moving forward under the spiteful and stifling hands of a clearly oppressive central government. The Tobago House of Assembly was established under Act 40 of 1996, a landmark piece of legislation that was meant to usher in a new era of self-management for our beloved Tobago. While it granted certain authorities, it fell short of the autonomy we have demanded and deserve. For decades, Tobagonians have cried out for a system of governance that truly reflects our unique identity and aspirations, and so continues our long and convoluted history of pursuing our outright to self-determination. Thus far, the passage of the bills presented could be described as underwhelming, unsubstantiated, and unfair treatment to the people of Tobago. The current bills before our Parliament, the Island Government Bill, and the Act to amend the Constitution fail to capture the essence of our demands for genuine self-governance. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, it's not merely about legislative changes.
He's right, you didn't indicate.
Madam Presiding Officer, may I be guided by Standing Order 52 to read my speech?
Standing Order 42.6.
Yeah.
42.7, rather. Be so guided. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. The last THA elections showed just how exasperated our people are. The referendum was clear then, and it will become The referendum was clear then, and it will become even clearer in the nearer future. Let me turn to a time that when we saw a glimmer of hope. In 2016, a draft autonomy bill was put forward, a significant document proposing extensive legislative and executive powers for Tobago. It included the establishment of a Tobago Legislature, formally recognizing our boundaries and our right to self-determination. Sadly, however, the bills currently before the Parliament have omitted these pivotal proposals. What it says, Madam Presiding Officer, is that the extensive work put in by Mr. London, Mr. Ho-Choi Charles, and their team, the National Advisory Committee, has been disregarded and shelved. This has to be a slap in the face to every single Tobagonian. However, under this administration, we will not turn the other cheek. As we anticipate the debate of the Constitution Amendment, Tobago Self-Government Bill, and the Tobago Island Government Bill, these bills must reflect the aspirations of our people as outlined in the 2016 draft bill. We must ensure these bills genuinely advance Tobago's autonomy and adhere to the core principles we have long fought for. The current bills, despite their proposed changes, fall short. Imagine these bills are meant to repeal and replace the current THA Act, yet they fail to address critical issues such as equal representation, jurisdiction over our maritime boundaries, and expanded financial autonomy. How could you fail to define our territorial boundaries accurately? Then effectively, Tobago has no claim to its rights other than the land on which we stand and its internal waters. 11 nautical miles is what they are proposing to us. How do we define our economic geographic space and jurisdiction, Madam Presiding Officer? This is absolutely necessary in order to define our worth as an island. These are not negotiable aspects of meaningful self-governance. Speaking to the aspect of executive authority, this new island government bill states that in accordance, Section 75A, 1B of the Constitution, exclusive administration is conferred to the Tobago Executive Council in relation to the list of matters in Schedule 1, and shall extend to such part of the territorial sea measuring 11 nautical miles from the lowest watermark. This is a typical example of playing smart with foolishness. These boundaries limit the island's potential for development and growth. It is not what the people agreed to in the wider consultations. This bill also states that no provision is allowed for the Executive Council to interpret authority and enter into any agreement with any foreign state. Yes, they are asking that our proposed island government ask permission from the central government to interact with foreign government corporations or investors on behalf of the people of Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, does this look like the equity they promise in this new dispensation of life? This bill empowers the central government to prescribe rules of conduct for the Tobago Island government, essentially stating, and I quote, that these will be specified from time to time by Parliament. This ambiguity places our autonomy at the mercy of central government directives and undermines our hard-earned rights. We cannot allow a fox to guard the hen house. Our autonomy must be honest, substantial, and reflective of the people's will. Moreover, the latest committee's composition, which empowers the central government to dictate terms, is unacceptable. Madam Presiding Officer, in a Newsday article dated June 2018, many of our luminaries gave their opinion on the amendments made to the draft bill. Former Chief Secretary Ho-Choi Charles, the people of Tobago must reject the entire bill, considering our conversation. It lacks structure. Dr. Winford James, political analyst, the bills are a reversal of many good autonomy ideas from 2016 and earlier. I stand resolutely against them. Dr. Vanus James, economist, these bills fail to deliver Tobago the promised equality of status or self-determination and should be rejected on that basis alone. They also include provisions that will effectively make Tobago a colony of Trinidad and severely damage the country's economic diversification and development prospects. Stanley Beard, the bills presented will not advance the cause and needs of Tobagonians. Tobagonians must be responsible for charting a course and the pace of development on the island. Shirley Cook, Vice President, Crown Point Business Association. The provision in the bills do not reflect the right to self-determination and equality of status as listed in the amended Constitution. Deborah Moore Miggins, former Assemblyman. The bills are contradictory within themselves and are inconsistent in several respects with what Tobago people have expressly said what they want and should be withdrawn. They take us back to before 1996 and are totally unacceptable. Madam Presiding Officer, here we have it. The general consensus on these bills is that they do not have the best interests of our people and its people at heart. I call on the minority and their friends in Parliament, especially those whose birth certificate says they were born in Tobago, to do the right thing and join the rest of the island in rejecting this farce. We don't want it. It makes no sense, and we are not accepting any legislation that places us before 1996. Let it be resolved that this House reaffirms the principle outlined in the 2016 draft bill. We demand equality of status between Trinidad and Tobago, comprehensive legislative powers for Tobago, and a clear recognition of our boundaries and jurisdiction. We support the passage of autonomy bills contingent on these provisions being met, ensuring Tobago's legislature has the authority to govern all local matters with expanded legislative and financial powers. Moreover, we urge a transparent and collaborative process involving bipartisan discussions with the central government, the THA, and stakeholders in Tobago. This is not just about passing bills. It's about finalizing a version that meets the autonomy objectives we have established through years of consultations. Our journey towards self-governance is not a quest for separation, but a demand for recognition and respect. It is about ensuring our voices are heard, our needs addressed, and our rights upheld within the framework of our nation. As we debate these bills, let us remember our history. Tobago has long been a prized possession, fought over by European powers and coveted for its strategic importance. Today, we fight not for conquest, but for the right to determine our own destiny. I speak for my colleagues and me as we stand with the rest of Tobago, fist clenched and upright, reaffirming our battle cry, no retreat, no surrender. Yes. Let us move forward with unity, determination, and an unwavering commitment to the principles of self-governance and autonomy for Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, I thank you.
Chair recognizes Minority Councillor.
Thank
Mrs.
you,
Petal
Madam
Daniel
Presiding
Benoit, you may
Officer.
now enter this debate.
Madam Presiding Officer, thank you for the opportunity to join the debate on this very important motion piloted by the Minority Leader. Madam Presiding Officer, before I get into the substantive motion on the order paper today, permit me to take the opportunity to acknowledge October being Breast Cancer Month, Madam Presiding Officer, that it is important that we recognize those survivors from breast cancer and that we advocate for early detection and we support the families of those survivors. So I now want to turn my attention to the matter of hand that we find ourselves at this pivotal juncture, Madam Presiding Officer. And I want to address some comments that were made earlier, and one in particular by the Deputy Chief Secretary. And the Deputy Chief Secretary and other members on the other side, when they spoke about the issue of the definition of Tobago. And I thought it important to share with this House and the people of Tobago some of the comments coming out of the Joint Select Committee. And we all know that there was consultation, decades of consultation on this matter. There were written submissions as well as oral submissions when the bills were taken from the Tobago House of Assembly to Parliament, a joint select committee was appointed to review, and based on the reports from the joint select committee indicated that they reviewed the bill clause by clause. Madam Presiding Officer, we moved from a situation, and I wouldn't go as far back as the member for Roxborough, but we moved from County Council. We established the Tobago House of Assembly. We recognizing that, you know, that initial establishment, the Act of 1980, did not fully give us all that we required as an island, resulting in subsequent amendments. Now we are Act 40 of 1996. And we are at a position, Madam Presiding Officer, where, as the minority leader would have indicated in piloting the motion, do we prefer to say we don't want it at all, rather than we continue to move along the development trajectory in order to further the development and get greater autonomy for Tobago? So as we seek to speak about the definition of Tobago, based on the Joint Select Committee's report and the clause-by-clause review of the bill, the report says Clause 6 of the bill, referred to the committee, proposes to add a delineation or definition of the island of Tobago by reference to maritime waters surrounding the island. In the interpretation of the clause of the Constitution, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, several representations were made to the committee on this issue. On one hand, Tobago stakeholders contended that it is possible to define Tobago within the Constitution, not by mere reference to landmass, but by reference to Tobago waters. On the other hand, constitutional experts, as well as specialists and jurists in the law of the sea, disagreed and cautioned against such an approach. The committee was advised that as Trinidad and Tobago is an archipelago state, it is therefore defined as one unified legal entity or jurisdiction in all relevant laws. The nationhood of Trinidad and Tobago is built on the concept of unity between the islands and the interconnecting waters. Those seas are regarded as a unifying, not as a separating element. It is the basis on which Trinidad and Tobago's archipelago status rests. The report further goes on to say, additionally, Justice Anthony Luckey opinioned that if the islands of Trinidad and Tobago are separately defined within the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago by reference of the archipelagical waters belonging to the state, that is ineffectively is as an act of separation and will likely provoke several issues in current national laws and international conventions, protocols, treaties to which Trinidad and Tobago is a party. And therefore, the seas around, between, and connecting the islands of the state of Trinidad and Tobago under the sovereignty of the state, irrespective of the individual breadth and dimensions of the separate islands of the archipelagical state. So in keeping with that, and this is the reason why the committee did not support the constitutional definition of Tobago as proposed by the bill referred. And Madam Presiding Officer, I want to go further because the Deputy Chief Secretary spoke to the fact that the bill takes away the 6 nautical miles that we have. But I want to take the opportunity again to bring to the attention of this House and the people of Tobago, when you consider the current THA Act under Section 4, it speaks to how we define Tobago in want of a better word. And in the proposed legislation, Clause 5 also deals with that section. So if I read Section 4 of the Tobago House of Assembly Act 40 of 1996, it reads, "No provision of this act or of an assembly law shall be construed or interpreted so as to authorize A, anything that is inconsistent with or contrary or in derogation of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, or B, any operation of any assembly law beyond the confines of the island of Tobago and such part of the territorial sea of Trinidad and Tobago comprising those areas in the sea having as their inner limits the baseline of Tobago as determined in accordance with Section 5 of the Territorial Sea Act, and as their outer limits a line measured seaward from those baselines, every point of which is distant 6 nautical miles from the nearest point of those baselines unless the contrary is expressly stated therein." Madam Presiding Officer, this is the current THA Act. And if we look to what is proposed in the bill, it basically says the same thing that is in the Act. However, it changes 6 nautical miles to 11 nautical miles. So the Island Government Bill says, and this is Section 2, the exclusive administrative jurisdiction conferred on the Tobago Executive Council by subsection 1 in relation to the list of matters set out in Schedule 1 shall extend to such part of the territorial sea of Trinidad and Tobago comprising those areas of the sea having as their inner limits the low water mark of Tobago and as their outer limits a line measured seaward from the low water mark, every point of which is at a distance of 11 nautical miles from the nearest point of that of the low water mark. So, Madam Presiding Officer, it is misleading to say that the current bill's propose is taking away the current jurisdiction of Tobago. Based on the existing legislation is 6 nautical miles. The same definition applies under this current legislation, and it says 11 nautical miles. I want to move on, Madam Presiding Officer, and I want to deal with some specific elements of the clause of the bills that are proposed that does not currently exist in our current Act 40 of 1996. There's a constant discussion, and I want to go to Section 41 of the proposed bills, or Clause 41. There are discussions every year when it comes to the presentation of the estimates in the Assembly in June of every year. Persons ask the question, why do we have to come and lay estimates in June and then we don't know what we have and then we have to come back and do the reprioritization? What the current legislation proposes is that the Secretary of Finance lays the estimates of revenue and expenditure after receiving the allocation from the Parliament. So instead of coming in June and laying the estimates, which must be transmitted to the Cabinet and the Minister, the estimates and then come back after the budget is read sometime in September or October to do a reprioritization in the House in November. What the bill requires is that those estimates are laid subsequent to receiving or subsequent to being allocated the parliamentary allocation. Another area in the proposed legislation that currently does not exist in Act 40 of 1996 is for a more transparent management and prudent fiscal planning with the establishment of key committees. So Clause 18 of the proposed legislation establishes select committees. And based on this clause, the Tobago House of Assembly is mandated to establish select committees, including 4 specific ones, to review the Executive Council, authorities created by Tobago Acts, and any enterprise controlled by the Tobago Island government. These committees are empowered to appoint subcommittees, conduct public hearings, and appoint special advisors. And Madam Presiding Officer, Clause 19 speaks to the establishment of another committee that currently does not exist, which is the Public Accounts Committee. And this committee is to review the financial accounts of Tobago, including expenditure from appropriated funds, the Auditor General's report, the audited accounts of enterprises controlled under the Tobago Island government, and it ensures public spending is transparent and well managed. And another committee that is also established under Clause 20 of the proposed Island Government Bill is the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee, which reviews the budgetary expenditure of the Tobago Island government agencies. It ensures that the expenditure comply with Assembly approvals and identify administrative inefficiencies. And Madam Presiding Officer, this greater oversight by the House will be provided by the proposed legislation. Another area that I want to turn to is Clause 30 of the Island Government Bill. And we would have had extensive discussion in the House today about the minimum allocation. So Clause 30 of the Island Government Bill proposes a minimum allocation of 6.8%. And the clause reads, Parliament shall appoint for the use of the Tobago House of Assembly for any financial year no less than 6.8% of the total sum appropriated by Parliament in that financial year, or other such percentages as may be determined by the Fiscal Review Committee under Section 43 and approved by the Parliament. And this last part, as it says to what is the recommendation of the Fiscal Review Committee, Madam Presiding Officer, I will come to that. So if we look at the provisions of a minimum of 6.8% of the budget, I want to take this opportunity, Madam Presiding Officer, to point out to this House and the people of Tobago what we have forfeited by refusing to pass this legislation in Parliament. So, for the fiscal year 2021-2022, the national budget was 52.429 billion. The allocation to the Tobago House of Assembly was 2.35 billion, 4.5% of the national budget. And if the bills were enacted at that time, with a 6.8% minimum allocation, the Tobago House of Assembly would have received at the end of the financial, or for the financial year 2022, 3.57 billion. A difference between the allocation and what is proposed of 1.208 billion. If we go to the financial year ended 2023, the national budget was 57.685 billion. The THA allocation was 2.52, or 4.4% of the national budget. 6.8% would have been 3.9 billion. the difference being 1.402 billion. 2024, similarly, the national budget, 59.209 billion. THA allocation, 2.585 billion. 6.8% minimum, we would have received an allocation of 4.03 billion, falling short or losing out on 1.445 billion. And with this current budget that was read last month, that national budget was 59.741 billion, the THA allocation being 2.599 billion. 6.8% of that would have been 4.03 billion. The amount that we lost out on was 1.445 billion. Sorry, 1.463 billion. And the total amount lost by not having the bill over the 4 years is 5.52 billion. And Madam Presiding Officer, in this House in June, the Chief Secretary would have laid estimates to the tune of 3.95 billion. So if we would have had the minimum allocation of 6.8% of the national budget, Madam Presiding Officer, we would have received, the Tobago House of Assembly would have received more than what was requested. So it could have unlocked the Tobago's development agenda as was themed in that budget in June, and we would have had some left over. So, Madam Presiding Officer, I want to move to the Secretaries of Infrastructure comment about the Fiscal Review Committee. And the member would have spoken about the Fiscal Review Committee determining the allocation and the allocation base. It may come to a situation where they may, if the Fiscal Review Committee says that we would get 0, then the allocation to Tobago would be 0. But Madam Presiding Officer, if you check the clause in relation, and that is clause 43, in relation to the Fiscal Review Committee, that clause speaks to the composition of the committee, and a member would have went into that before. It speaks on the term of the committee. It also speaks to the functions of the committee. And some of the functions of the responsibilities of the committee shall be to A, determine and recommend to Parliament the sums required to be appropriated to Tobago in each fiscal year, in each financial year, establish a mechanism for revenue sharing between the Tobago Island government and the government of Trinidad and Tobago, ensure that all revenues, fees, and duties collected in Trinidad that are attributable to Tobago, as such from custom duties, import duties, and stamp duties, and other duties shall be held for the account of Tobago. And Madam Presiding Officer, this is a discussion that we have been having a long time, because there are funds that are collected in Trinidad on behalf of Tobago. So the Fiscal Review Committee has that as one of its responsibilities, to initiate special audits into any financial matter of the Tobago Island government. And the list goes on. Madam Presiding Officer, subsection 6 of that said clause speaks to the report of the Fiscal Review Committee. So let me go back to section 5, sorry. Section 5 says, or subsection 5, the Fiscal Review Committee shall submit to Parliament prior to the presentation of the budget in any financial year a report on the review of the sums required to be appropriated. And subsection 6 says that the report of the Fiscal Review Committee shall be taken into consideration by Parliament in making an appropriation above the 6.8% in any financial year. So, Madam Presiding Officer, based on all the responsibilities, and I would have listed them in part, the recommendation of the Fiscal Review Committee comes in for considerations of the Parliament above the minimum threshold of 6.8%. So to say that the Fiscal Review Committee could decide not to give the Tobago House of Assembly an allocation is also misleading. And based on the clause, the minimum allocation is 6.8%, and the minority leader would have alluded to it. The Fiscal Review Committee, there is no threshold as to what the upper limit can be. I want to move on to section or clause 37. And this clause provides for borrowing both locally and internationally for purposes related to the functions for prudent financial management or investment approved by the Tobago Legislature. And this section of the clause speaks particularly to the minister not withholding without reasonable clause approval to borrow. Subsection 38 speaks to investments. And Madam Presiding Officer, all these clauses that I would have identified currently, or all the provisions, is not currently included in the current Act 40 of 1996. I also want to move on at this time to look at the schedules. Madam Presiding Officer, under the current Act 40 of 1996, we have a 5th schedule, a 6th, and a 6th schedule. The 5th schedule would have identified areas of responsibility of the Tobago House of Assembly, or areas of responsibility of the Assembly, and there are 33 items listed here. In the proposed legislation, there are items, or there's a Schedule 1, which lists the matters for which the Tobago Executive Council shall have exclusive administrative jurisdiction. And Madam Presiding Officer, I took the opportunity to go through the items set out in the 5th schedule of the current Act 40 of 1996 and compare them to what currently is proposed.
Member, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And Madam Presiding Officer, out of, when I did the comparison, every item that was listed in the 5th schedule is listed. They are listed here in Schedule 1. And there are other matters that are in Schedule 1 that currently does not reside in Act 40 of 1996. And that relates to labor, Office of the Chief Secretary, Tobago Legislature, Works and Youth Development. So, Madam Presiding Officer, to say, and the cemeteries, because there's an item that speaks to museums, archives, historical sites, and historical buildings. And in that item, under the proposed legislation, cemeteries are included. So again, Madam Presiding Officer, to say that the bill is taken away, there's another instance where that is also misleading. And the bill proposes lawmaking powers. So if we look at the benefits and we compare what currently exists to what is being proposed, we have a minimum allocation under the proposed bill of 6.8. Currently, we have a minimum of 4.03. We have the powers under the proposed legislation to borrow and to invest. There are no current provisions under this legislation to borrow and invest. Lawmaking powers, Madam Presiding Officer, that currently does not exist. Representation on the Public Service and the Teaching Service Commission, an expanded assembly, 25 members, 15 assemblymen, and 10 councillors divided into 5 for the majority, 3 for the minority, and 2 independent, compared to now 19 members, 15 assemblymen, 4 councillors on the majority, and 1 on the minority. The auditors can be upgraded to the level of deputy permanent secretary. That currently is not provided under the current legislation, and as well as the provisions to make more than one administrator to be assigned a division. So, Madam Presiding Officer, the bills will provide for increased financial autonomy, borrowing power, and budgetary control for Tobago. And I want to encourage this House, Madam Presiding Officer, to support the motion that was presented, and I want to put forward one amendment as was indicated by the minority leader, and I want to, in the substantive motion, under paragraph 8, to delete the word amendment and replace it with delay. So the motion will now read in that resolution, and be it further resolved that this House encourages all necessary actions to ensure the passage of appropriate bills, including an urgent bipartisan meeting between members of the THA and Parliament to facilitate their smooth and timely enactment without further delay. And Madam Presiding Officer, I make this amendment.
Do I have a seconder?
Seconded, Madam Presiding Officer.
Honorable members, the amendment to the motion has been seconded by Assemblyman Morris. Honorable House, the question proposed is that the motion be amended by inserting the word delay after the word further at the last resolution of the motion and leave out the word amendment. Let me remind you all that you all could debate on the substantive motion with the amendment or the amendments that were proposed by the executive. Councillor Boris, the chair recognizes you. You may now join this debate.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I want to start by quoting an African proverb that states, "Until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero." And it was very difficult for me to sit down all day listening to the minority redwash history and paint themselves as the heroes of Tobago's autonomy movement and autonomy struggle. In fact, the irony is not lost on me, that we stand in a chamber that would not exist if left up to the People's National Movement, a party that never supported the creation of the THA, nor the island's aspirations for self-determination.
Members, one moment, Councillor Boris. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but a light tap on the desk. Lightly tap the desk. Councillor Boris, you may continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, and we will endeavor to take care of the furniture of the Assembly chamber going forward. As I said, the irony is not lost on me, because the PNM never supported any conversation about the people of Tobago realizing self-determination. And it is the hypocrisy of the minority to bring this motion, to ask us to rubber stamp the passage of these bills under the guise of giving Tobago more, rank hypocrisy. They will attempt to redwash history. And as far as I'm aware, the only good thing is red mango. The minority leader made reference to a house. He used the analogy of a house, that the constitutional amendment bill is the foundation and the Tobago Island government bill is the superstructure. But I am aware that the people of Tobago asked for this house to be built with mahogany, cedar, teak, and purple heart. But the PNM is giving us pitch pine. This is a pitch pine bill, a pitch pine motion. That is what they've attempted to do. Political sleight of hand. Today I stand before this respected chamber with a deep sense of obligation to support the motion as amended by my colleague, Dr. Faith B. Israel. And this debate should not be treated as a mere formality of our proceedings in this House, but rather it represents the continuation of decades of struggle, dialogue, and advocacy on behalf of the people of Tobago by Tobago's greatest leaders who have sought nothing more than the right to govern our affairs within the framework of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, this debate is of significant importance, not just for the people of Tobago, but for all who cherish justice, equality, and human rights. And the right to self-determination is essential for the functioning of democratic governance. And this right, the right of a people to determine their own political, economic, and social status, is enshrined by agencies such as the International Court of Justice and the United Nations. And we have similar stories across the Commonwealth. Countries such as Scotland, Wales, Canada's Quebec, Australia's Northern Territory, and Bermuda, all members of the Commonwealth, who have varying degrees of autonomy and self-governance that mirror what Tobago aspires to achieve today. Tobago only wants what we have seen happen in other places: a political, executive, and legislative system that reflects our distinct history, culture, and our ambitions. We spoke about Act 40 of 1996. We went to lengths to discuss what it did. And it was a milestone. At the time, what it did was created what we know as the modern-day Tobago House of Assembly. But it was not the ultimate destination. And before I go forward, Madam Presiding Officer, I want to lay some definitions in the House. Let's start with autonomy, because autonomy is where we are at right now. Autonomy is a limited form of self-rule granted by central government, allowing control over certain areas, but not full sovereignty or independence. Self-government, however, involves managing internal affairs and exercising political power, often within an existing sovereign state. So self-government is where we want to get to. But self-determination, which is the crux of why we're here today, is the overarching right of a people to decide their own political fate, potentially leading to independence. And I want us to have those three definitions in mind, because we like to mix the terms and we like to interchange them. But I want the people of Tobago to be very clear. We have autonomy, limited. We are moving or want to move towards self-government. But ultimately, the ultimate destination for the people of Tobago is self-determination. And the Tobago House of Assembly Act gave us some degrees of autonomy. And at the time, it was a huge thing for us. It created this Tobago House of Assembly. And this THA has been charged with overseeing the administrative and economic affairs of the island, and it allows us Tobagonians limited powers to do the things that we want to do to make sure that the citizens of this island are comfortable. And to be quite honest with you, when you look across the Commonwealth, there are different regions that have grappled with the challenge of balancing local self-governance with the oversight of a central authority. Wales, for example, is a constituent country of the United Kingdom, and they have been advocating for greater fiscal autonomy since the establishment of its devolved government in 1999. With particular focus on gaining increased control over taxation and natural resources. Similarly, in Quebec in Canada, they have consistently pursued increased autonomy over their fiscal and economic policies, while still remaining part of the Canadian Federation. Regions such as Tobago have acknowledged that genuine self-governance encompasses more than mere administrative control. It also necessitates legislative and fiscal independence. Let us get to self-determination, Madam Presiding Officer. Self-determination is a principle of justice and democracy. And the concept of self-determination, as I said before, is fundamental to the democratic process. And it feels as if along the entire length and breadth of this journey that the people of Tobago have been denied their democratic right to say what they want and what they don't want. So we come here in this house today to hear the minority say that we should just support the bills in their current form because it gives us some things but not other things, and we should be satisfied with that. No. If we are standing side by side as Trinidad and Tobago, the people of Tobago have the right to determine what we want, how we want it, when we want it, where we go after we take it. We have the inherent right to shape our own future and govern ourselves according to our distinct values, traditions, and ambitions. And this is a fundamental principle recognized in law and is the cornerstone of democratic governance. And instruments such as the United Nations Charter and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, along with a multitude of other international agreements, uphold the universal right to self-determination. These proposed bills, they are a step forward, but we're not going far enough. We have gone through this process before, Madam Presiding Officer. And I think that Tobagonians know about the adage of measuring twice and cutting once. But the PNM so want to cut and cut. They just cut out the heart of what Tobagonians want for themselves. And they want to come here and disguise it and dangle a carrot in front of us. Take 6.8%, hold this biscuit and shut your mouth. And takes away from us the thing that can help us self-actualize as a people. Madam Presiding Officer, the Constitutional Amendment, Tobago Self-Government Bill, and the Tobago Island Government Bill, they are just but another step on the journey towards Tobago's pursuit of self-governance. And although these legislative proposals aim to improve Tobago's standing, we have seen that it just simply does not do enough, and it does not reflect the will of the people. The people have been clear. And we stand here as vessels on behalf of the people to send a message to central government that we have said very clearly what we want. So don't come and try to pretend that you're giving us what we say we want and you're not doing it. That is negotiating in bad faith. And the central government continues to negotiate with the people of Tobago in bad faith. This move by the central government to introduce those bills, and it always comes up, election is in the air, so Tobago is a political football again, because they like to say what Tobago wants, Tobago will get, but that is never true. We only become important when an election is looming, and when somebody has to decide who goes into government in Trinidad. And the people of Tobago, our aspirations, the things that we want for ourselves are always left on the back burner, because we are sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. These bills are not comprehensive enough, and they do not meet the minimum standards for the collective aspirations expressed by the Tobagonian people through numerous platforms, through numerous legal channels. The public of Tobago, via their representatives and civic organizations, have unequivocally stated that vital aspects of self-government are either absent or insufficiently covered in the current legislative proposals. And let us examine some of those shortcomings. We spoke about insufficient fiscal autonomy, and my colleague, Councillor Petalan Roberts, will expound on that. But the major shortcoming is that the bills fail to ensure adequate fiscal independence for the island and the people of Tobago. And although it offers Tobago an increased minimum budgetary allocation, what they keep leaving out of the discourse is that we can get that money right now. We don't need these bills to pass. Our current range allows us to get up to 6.9% of the budget. So don't tell me, oh, the minimum is going to go to 6.8. Why they don't give it to us now? Answer me that. It doesn't give us the sufficient fiscal autonomy. Inadequate control over our natural resources, and my colleague, Secretary Charles Panton, alluded to this. Our marine resources. I heard the Minority Councillor make reference to 11 nautical miles. So we have 6 now, we get 5. When we could get 200. If Tobago existed as a sovereign independent state in the morning, our exclusive economic zone will extend up to 200 miles in a particular direction. Why are we taking 5? Why are we taking 5? Why are we accepting bare minimum? It will be irresponsible of the members on this side to rubber stamp this, because what essentially we will be doing is giving away the patrimony of generations of Tobagonians who are not yet born. We cannot do that today. Limited legislative authority. A significant shortcoming of the proposed legislation is inadequate legislative empowerment for the THA. And although they confer expanded powers, they fall short of providing the autonomy necessary for the THA to legislate and govern effectively in domains that are crucial to its constituents. For genuine self-governance, a region requires uninterrupted, unencumbered authority to enact laws in pivotal sectors such as education, healthcare, environmental conservation, and resource administration, independent of central government approval. I want to go to the issue of safety and security, because under the current THA Act, national security falls under the 6th schedule. We know what we face in the Tobago space, the increase in incidents of violent crimes and murders. And we have been hamstrung as a THA because the current THA Act does not speak to us being able to control our own island safety and security. And these proposed bills do not change that reality for us. The THA, through its efforts, is doing more than the TTPS right now to try to combat crime on the island. The central government has left Tobago adrift where crime is concerned. They have under-resourced all of the national security apparatus in Tobago, every single one. Every Monday morning, the Chief Secretary is talking about, I have to find some vehicles for the police, I have to find some vehicles for the Coast Guard, I have to find a boat for the Coast Guard, I have to find mattresses for some soldiers to sleep on, I have to go and fix the prison, I have to go and fix the base. The THA spending that money, not the minister. And these bills do not even give us the opportunity to take charge of our internal security on this island. And Madam Presiding Officer, if we go in to cut the cloth, let me cut the cloth the right way. Madam Presiding Officer, we have seen that the safety of the island of Tobago is not a priority of central government. And to be fair to them, they have their hands full with crime in Trinidad. They have a task down there. But when they are making decisions, critical decisions with respect to national security, Tobago is left behind. If a fisherman goes missing, we don't even have the latitude to tell the police, look, we know this man missing. He don't stay out in the sea so long. Go and search for him now. No. 24 hours had to pass. You call the Coast Guard, somebody missing. We don't have a vessel. They really care about Tobago, but I come in here to act like hero. We need to save ourselves. The main issues remain when it comes to safety and security. Resource allocation. They do not send the resources to Tobago, so as a responsible government, we find the resources. Delayed response time, I just talked about it. We are not in charge of the TTPS. We spoke about Tobago police bills, but that is not even put in these current bills that we're talking about to give us the opportunity to create a Tobago police service that answers to the Tobago House of Assembly, that answers to the people of Tobago, that respond immediately to the needs of the people of Tobago. We don't have that. Lack of localized control is always down the road. Central government, they could pick up in the morning and change the ACP, send somebody from up the road who have no clue what's going on in Tobago. He don't even know the name of the spranger on the corner. And expect that person to solve crime on the island. And these things underscore the need for increased local governance and jurisdiction over these matters. Madam Presiding Officer, I go to the tourism sector, which is the lifeblood of Tobago's economy. And it is critical that we, the people of Tobago, are granted the authority to intentionally and responsibly manage our tourism resources, including our maritime jurisdiction, which is a huge part of our tourism assets. Tourism is made up of what God give we and who we are. That's what we sell. That's what we market. And in a political sleight of hand, as I said, we have 6 miles of administrative control, they give us 5 miles. And we should be celebrating that. When Tobago has almost 200 miles in certain directions of maritime jurisdiction that can be exploited through oil, gas, fisheries, other types of tourism activity. But we're confined, again, we're confined. They continue to confine us. And they want us to say yes to this. They keep talking about this 6.8%, but people of Tobago, don't accept the stone from the man who offers it and says, that is all I have. But the quarry that you own, you don't have access to. Let us not be fooled. Remember, all mutual funds are not the same. Our tourism sector, industry, has immense potential, and you don't have to tell me. Just came from the airport. Tobago will sink this weekend. Every plane coming full, every boat coming full. And I heard the minority leader is having a soiree on Saturday. Yes, let me give you some free PR. Please support the minority leader with his soiree on Saturday. He's participating in the carnival, the same carnival that he said last year with a bus. I guess you made an economic decision to support this year. I clap you for that. But we want to control our own destiny. The people of Tobago understand better than anyone else what is needed to develop a sustainable and thriving tourism sector that benefits our economy and our community. And if these bills do what they are supposed to do, if they do what they're supposed to do, Tobago can become a leader in this country of Trinidad and Tobago where tourism is concerned. We have been calling for more control. We have the knowledge, the passion, the vision to develop a tourism industry that preserves our natural beauty and our cultural heritage and generates significant foreign exchange. But the bills do not allow us to do that. And let me explain. 2 things, 2 critical things I want to point out. 1, the bills do not address the need for Tobago to have charge over international relations. And the bills are silent on this matter. And let me tell you what are the implications of that. So we can't partner with anybody. Tobago cannot approach a Jamaica, a Barbados, a Grenada. We always like to talk about the numbers that other destinations are getting. But we always have to go through a central government in Trinidad to have those conversations, those diplomatic relations. And these bills, again, do not give us the opportunity to do that. So we cannot enter into bilateral agreements with foreign governments, airlines, tourism bodies to help grow our tourism sector. We have to depend on a central government to negotiate on our behalf. And you know what that means? When the negotiations are taking place, Tobago is not a priority in these discussions. But you know what they come to do? Every budget, we go in and build a 5-star hotel in Tobago. Who all you ask that? Who all you consult with? And that is the point that I'm trying to make. If Tobago is standing side by side with Trinidad, critical decisions being made about our tourism sector will not be made without representation from Tobago in the room. These current arrangements impose significant limitations to our ability to manage things like immigration, which is a key and crucial component of our tourism industry. And I've heard the complaints, the immigration officers not friendly. So you could imagine that visitors have to go through, transiting through Trinidad, meeting unfriendly immigration officers, sleep on the airport to come and catch a flight to Tobago. And we want to talk about being great. That is why we can't compete. Because from the time someone lands in another destination, the first interaction they have is welcoming. The first interaction speaks to a level of customer care and experience, and we don't have control over that. We don't even get to pick the immigration officers they send to Tobago, or who is in the line at Piaco welcoming the visitors who want to come to Tobago. And the bills do not address these things. It doesn't give us any control over those immigration policies and those arrangements, including visas. Imagine that we are at the place where we are looking for new source markets, right? All of these things are centralized under central government. And this severely hampers our ability to respond swiftly and effectively to demands of the tourism market. COVID was an excellent example. The rest of the Caribbean was reopened within 4 months. Tobago was the destination that was the second to last to open in the entire world. We only got our first international flight in January of 2022, a full 6 months after Trinidad was already accepting international flights. How is that fair when Tobago is supposed to be your tourism island? Another glaring example is the visa application process. We have people who want to come to Tobago from different jurisdictions, and we may decide that we may want to relax visa policies. We may want to create new visa regimes to encourage other types of visitors to come, nomads, digital nomads, retirees. We can't do any of that. Other jurisdictions have been able to do that because they have their independence, because they have the autonomy, because they can do it. Tobago is still lagging behind. And we still have to stay behind. While the rest of the Caribbean has gone to digital entry forms, we're still doing manual forms. Even though we have the will, we have the resources, we have the wherewithal to want to get it done for the island of Tobago. Central government is not focused on promoting Tobago as a tourism destination. They pay lip service to it all the time. The Prime Minister is on record as saying he's going to move heaven and hell to build a Marriott. When the Marriott built, what happening after that? How are we building out the other things to support the success of the Marriott and any other type of foreign direct investment where tourism is concerned? The THA, this Tobago House of Assembly, understands that this is part of the journey. But the reality is that we can't do it halfway. We can't do it halfway at all. We have to ensure that if we are setting up ourselves for success, that we don't have to go down the road 5 years to get changes and beg for amendments. That we don't have to go 10 years down the road because there's some emergency that changed the way that we do business, that we have to ask the central government to go back again. Let me get it thing right, once and for all. So we speak about bipartisan support. And I have some hope that maybe the members on the other side will encourage their colleagues after the conversation we've had today to ensure that the Prime Minister, who is the head of government, approaches the THA, invites the THA to a very long overdue conversation about what is required for the people of Tobago to not just survive in this world, but to thrive. And there is precedent. There's precedent for fruitful self-governance accords. We've seen it in Scotland, between Scotland and the UK government. We've seen it in Quebec. We've seen it happen in other places in the world. Go to between Tobago. We can definitely see it happen here.
Member, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, the time for action is now. And we on this side have a lot of work to do to hit the ground running, to educate the people of Tobago as to what we are in and what we're getting into. So I call upon this esteemed House to endorse the motion as amended by my colleague, Dr. Faith B. Israel. The citizens of Tobago have been patient in their quest for self-determination, a right that is long overdue. And I will repeat, because the wisdom of the elders stands regardless. We need to measure twice, and we need to cut once. And because the PNM want to cut, they cut out the meat. And they're dangling empty promises in front of us. I can tell you that the PNM probably took us to independence, and they took us to republicanism. But the PNM will never take Tobago to where we need to go. Never. Because this house would not stand if left up to them. We have truly come too far to turn back now. The bills as worded are a political red herring. And I know plenty of people in here like smoke herring. But you have to be careful with smoke herring because it's a fish that have plenty bone. And the bones in these bills are designed to choke and choke the aspirations of the people of today. And we appreciate that the general election has put some fire under the autonomy conversation. But I do not trust that 39 Trinidadian MPs and 28 senators should sit and arbitrate wholly and solely on the future of the people of Tobago. I do not trust, and we do not trust that they will get it right this time. And we also do not trust the 4.5 Tobagonians down the road that will put their island before party. 4.5 Tobagonians. They say great is the PNM. They never say great is Tobago. They keep saying great is their party. Watch that. They will continue to write with a PNM pen, drink from a PNM cup, and read from a PNM script. These bills expose the critical need for wider interrogation of the 135-year relationship between these two islands, where we are at now, where we want to go individually, and where we want to go together. And while the proposed bills are a step in the right direction, they fall critically short of what is truly needed. The people of Tobago have elected those on this side to not only seek their interests, but to ensure that we set our future generations on the path to sustainability by the decisions we make today. Let us ensure that in whatever we do, Tobagonians in the future can look back on us and say, well done, good and faithful servants. Well done. I thank you.
Do we have another speaker to contribute? I recognize Councillor Petalan Roberts. You may now join us today.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, and thank you, in the absence of the Chief Secretary, I would like to thank him for the opportunity, especially at a time like this. Thank you to my colleagues for your unending support since I was appointed into office. Presiding Officer, also allow me, with an exception to Section 42.7 of the Standing Orders, so I can read and also
So granted.
From my heart. Today we gather for a significant moment in the legislative history of our nation to discuss, debate, argue the fact that an amended motion has been placed before us on two bills that carry profound implications for our governance, our constitution, and the future of our twin island republic, and more importantly, significantly for Tobago. The draft Constitutional Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill and the draft Tobago Island Government Bill. These bills are not mere pieces of legislation, but they represent the culmination of dialogue, consultation, and reflection on how best to equalize this arrangement, and also for the unique aspirations of the people of Tobago while strengthening the unity and resilience of our nation as a whole. In essence, these bills should seek to strike a balance between self-determination and national cohesion. The Constitutional Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill should address critical reforms that are necessary To modernize and enhance the constitutional framework, it should be built upon the foundation of our democratic principles while incorporating changes that reflect the evolving needs of our society, especially here in Tobago. This bill should intend to fortify the integrity of our governance structures and ensure that there is more responsive, inclusive, and be capable of meeting the needs and challenges, not only for now, but beyond our years. Madam Presiding Officer, we have a Tobago Island government bill, which should speak directly to the issue of self-determination for the people of Tobago. For far too long, Tobago has sought greater autonomy to manage its internal affairs, to develop its unique culture and economy, and to determine its future within the context of a sovereign state. A bill such as this should seek to grant Tobago enhanced powers and responsibilities, providing the island with a more robust legislative and executive framework to chart our own course. At the same time, it should ensure that Tobago remains an integral part of the Twin Island Republic, connected by shared history, shared values, and national interest. Madam Presiding Officer, this is a rare opportunity to shape the course of the island's future. The exchanges I heard today, the discussions, the arguments, and the choices we make here today will define the future between Tobago and Trinidad, and it will serve as a testament of our commitment to equality, fairness, and mutual respect. Though the time that I have here may not permit me to go through every single flaw of these bills, my deliberations will reflect on the gravity of certain aspects, because we are not simply here to pass laws trying to gain any political mileage in an election season, but we are shaping the legacy of our island for us and for generations to come. Let me go straight into the meat of the matter, Madam Presiding Officer, that we have a deceptive person on the opposite side that have attempted to have this honorable house set aside the express will and associated
Councillor Petaran Roberts, I would advise you, I would caution you to choose your words wisely when addressing members of this house. Please continue.
Madam Presiding Officer, I'm sure that we all know who it is, the Assembly. I will address him as the Assemblyman for Darrow Spring Wim, which has the same.
The word in question here is deceptive. That's actually imputing improper motives against a member.
Okay,
so I would ask you to retract and continue.
I have retracted my statement. Set aside the express will and associated decades of struggle and suffering of Tobagonians for a right to self-determination by accepting and unconditionally supporting the passage of 2 deficient bills before Parliament. And it is an impressive dishonor to the very Tobagonians who have sent him here. Madam Presiding Officer, we who are genuinely here to promote and protect the will and aspiration of every single Tobagonian cannot and we will not support these bills before the Parliament, and this is what I want to say, in its current constitutional and legislative constructs. We want self-determination, we want any passage of legislation, but these 2 bills are insufficient. They don't meet the standards that Tobago has asked us. Madam Presiding Officer, as I said before, they do not meet the minimal constitutional and legislative thresholds of self-determination that we are expressly demanding. Permit me here to state that we on this side are of the strongest position that Tobago Island Government Bill, which seeks to establish the form, structure, and functions of our government, should not be passed by the Parliament, but rather right here in the Tobago Legislature as the first order of business. Madam Presiding Officer, our position is nested in one of fundamental principles of self-determination, and that is the right for the people to engineer and design a form of government of our own choice. and not one-handed to us by the minority leader and his colleagues in Trinidad who are attempting to put this bill before the Parliament. That said, Madam Presiding Officer, as Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy, and as I tell you as a Tobagonian, I want to seize this opportunity to share with this House and the listening right holders of self-determination in Tobago here of the deficiencies of the fiscal and financial positions of the Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill that is before Parliament. Madam Presiding Officer, the bill before Parliament is conspicuously lacking in its provisions that address the constitutional promotion and protection of the fiscal and financial rights of the entitlements of the people of Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, for example, Bill number 1 of 2013, Clause 10 of the amended 113 of the section of the Constitution, thereby making a provision for the amount appropriated for the purposes of the Assembly for any fiscal year, a minimum of 6.9, that's the previous bill that we had, in the range of 6.9 to 8% of the total sum appropriated by Parliament in the financial year, provided that the requisite connotational protection. And I wish to let the minority leader understand that 6.9 is more than 6.8 because in his contribution, he couldn't determine if 6.9 was more or less than 6.8. Madam Presiding Officer, the bill currently before the Parliament has no such provision and therefore does not offer the constitutional protection and guarantees necessary to safeguard the fiscal and financial integrity of the Tobago Island government. What they did, Madam Presiding Officer, is to put something similar in the Tobago Island government bill that is before us at Clause 30, offering a mere 6.8%, a reduction from the minimum 8% recommended in the original bill, which is not even at the current upper limit of the dispute resolution recommended 6.9, and with no constitutional protection and assurance. Madam Presiding Officer, the danger here is that central government, with a simple majority, can amend this anytime, and other provisions of the Tobago Island government legislation if it becomes law in its current construct. What is even more deceiving is that the fiscal 2025 budgetary process that the THA requested, a share of only 5.8%, which is 1 percentage point less than the 6.8 that they are now proposing, but they have comprehensively rejected by the minority leaders, colleagues in Trinidad, the sponsors of this bill that is before Parliament. Madam Presiding Officer, I stood and I heard the councillor, the minority councillor, calculating what we have lost. What we have lost is the PNM on December 6th. What we have been losing since then is allocations that we have requested from central government from 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and for fiscal 25. Those are the losses that we have made. Madam Presiding Officer, the truth is there is no need to amend or bring a law of 6.8% because the government can give us 6.8% right now. Right now. So they could have given us 5.1, which represents the percentage share of Tobago to the national population. We requested 5.8 in the last budget, and you're now coming to give us 6.8, or give us 6.8. Because the only losses that we have so far is that the People's National Movement governed Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, what has happened is that there are decades of successive governments, purely for political reasons, have weaponized the budgetary process and the legal framework against Tobagonians. And for this reason, Tobagonians must understand and work towards ensuring that any self-determination constitutional amendment bill must contain provisions that promote and protect the fiscal and financial rights and entitlements of Tobago. I now wish to turn my attention to the Tobago Fund, which is held in section 31 of the amendment bill that is proposed. What I heard the minority councillor doing is saying what it was not in the 1996 Act and what is now currently. But what I want to do, I want to compare the copy-paste that was done and the problems that we have with the copy-paste of the legislation. Section 31 says, and I really want to highlight section 31(2), but I'll start by saying there shall be a fund called the Tobago Fund, which shall consist of, and they list out what it shall consist of, but the relevant point I want to bring is that the monies appropriated by Parliament for the service of the year of the Tobago House of Assembly shall be credited to the Tobago Fund in quarter releases in advance or block. Section 47 says the exact same thing. And what we have been suffering with this clause, Madam Presiding Officer, is that the central government breaks this law every single year for the last 21 years when they were in office. Section 47, which says that we should receive our monies for the service of Tobago, quarterly releases in advance or block. The same exact thing is here. But what prevents them from breaking the law if we pass this bill in the morning? There are no provisions, no assurances, no constitutional protection. So what I would like to propose, Madam Presiding Officer, is that this part of the bill must now form part of the constitutional amendment bill and not the Tobago Island Government Bill, which they could come and change anytime. And they have been breaking this law, and I'll raise other clauses in the Tobago House of Assembly Act, which they don't care. They disregard, they disrespect, they don't care about the Tobago House of Assembly Act that governs how we operate here. Madam Presiding Officer, let me just highlight for you some of the realities that we face with Section 47, which would now be proposed as Section 41. Late releases from Parliament, which is not allowing the Tobago House of Assembly to plan, to execute, and to spend as we wish. Tobagonians have been complaining about late payments, things are not being done, and it is solely because our imperialists down the road have been sending releases on a monthly basis. The releases for this quarter came to the Tobago House of Assembly. I have the evidence in the fund account on the 17th of October. The law says it should be received in advance or block. That means I should receive 3 months up front, quarterly, at the beginning of the quarter. There are no protections, no assurances that the current administration would keep this clause of the law. And because of that, we currently have to activate an overdraft facility, which is very costly to the Tobago House of Assembly. And the Tobago House of Assembly is not provided with additional releases to cover this overdraft interest. And I've also already escalated that in many spaces. There are also shortfalls in allocation. And Madam Presiding Officer, let me raise for you a set-off arrangement that continues under the Tobago Island Government Bill. Section 49(3) says monies credited to the fund in accordance with subsection 1 and 2 shall be set off against annual allocation appropriated by Parliament to the fund. The same copy-paste is there upon coming into force of the Act. So if we look at section 32(3), we have a copy-paste of the Tobago House of Assembly Act 1996, which says monies credited to the Tobago Fund in accordance with subsection 1 and 2 shall be offset against the annual appropriation, allocation appropriated by Parliament to the Tobago House of Assembly Fund. Madam Presiding Officer, this clause in the Tobago House of Assembly Act, section 49, has been broken by the current central government ever since I knew myself, even before I came into the Tobago House of Assembly. There are no assurances, no protections for us here in Tobago that these laws will be kept if we pass this bill in the morning. our releases, our set-off arrangement causes us to be short in terms of our appropriation, because to date, the Tobago House of Assembly is owed by central government for the last 7 years, $176 million. Most recently, $10 million for fiscal 2024. We are bringing a legislation that should be modernized, that should make Tobagonians feel comfortable with a new and amended legislation, but the same provisions stand and the same arrangements stand and the same breaking of the law will continue by central government, especially the People's National Movement. Similarly, I would like to bring Section 38, the power to borrow, in the Tobago Island Government Bill. And it also stipulates that the Executive Council shall delegate its responsibility for the management of one of its investments to the central bank. I'm still trying to find a justifiable reason for this legislative prescription on which entity should really manage Tobago's investment. Madam Presiding Officer, what I would like to recommend, if that is to happen, is that the Tobago House of Assembly has an account in the central bank, which is called the Tobago Fund. And what that will do is cause an easy and seamless transfer of the Tobago's parliamentary appropriation from the consolidated fund. The current construct is that we get our funding, a check is cut somewhere down on Orange Hill Road, I think it is. A man has to physically pick up a check, drop it to the Tobago House of Assembly physically, and then it goes into the Tobago House of Assembly's fund account. And what we also suffer because of that, we have a commercial bank, the reduction in the interest on the overdraft facility that is linked to the Tobago House of Assembly fund account. The development of an account in the central bank will give us access to foreign currency and foreign exchange to meet our transactional obligations. Currently, the Tobago House of Assembly has to lobby and negotiate with the commercial bank with the minuscule amount of foreign exchange reserves when we can capitalize on an opportunity of getting access to foreign currency at the central bank. Madam Presiding Officer, Section 43 of the Tobago Island Government Bill provides for the establishment of the Fiscal Review Committee, comprising of the Finance Minister as the chair, the Secretary of Finance as probably the deputy, 2 members appointed by Parliament, and 1 member appointed by the Tobago Executive Council. Section 34(4) states that the responsibilities of the Fiscal Review Committee shall be to determine and recommend to the Parliament the sum required to be appropriated to Tobago in each financial year, among others. Clearly, Madam Presiding Officer, the composition of the Fiscal Review Committee is loaded to the benefit of the central government. And this is not in keeping with the principles of equality of status and the advancement of self-determination. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to bring also my personal and most recent interactions with the current Minister of Finance, and having an arrangement of this Fiscal Review Committee headed by the Minister of Finance that we currently have, it would not work and redound to the benefit of Tobagonians. It is worth noting here that the Ministry of Finance, in its submission to the committee, stated that the allocation to Tobago should not only be determined by the population size, but what is needed to meet year-on-year expenditure. But more progressively, what is required to Tobago's sustainable self-government, self-determined medium to long-term goals. And this brings me to the need for a more modern and fair revenue sharing arrangement between Tobago and Trinidad. And Madam Presiding Officer, I have a recommendation for a constitutionally protected fair share revenue arrangement. And in this regard, we are inclined to an agreement with the Cabinet in Trinidad, similar to the equalization payment model, which is currently existing in the Canadian federal government and the Atlantic Provisional Governments of Canada. Madam Presiding Officer, we have paid particular attention to the energy accord between the federal government of Canada and the Atlantic province of Nova Scotia, called the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord. A significant and key provision of the accord is the offshore revenue threshold, which is a fixed figure established by the legal agreement that goes on to the federal government from the royalties gained from oil and gas reserves generated from the exploration within the provincial territorial waters. And any amount above this threshold is paid into a Nova Scotia Provincial Government Offshore Revenue Fund. Madam Presiding Officer, within this framework of an offshore petroleum accord between Tobago and Trinidad, any revenues above a legally determined threshold will be deposited into a Tobago Offshore Revenue Fund. And I remember my colleague, Assemblyman James, speaking to an energy committee, which would, relate directly to this. Madam Presiding Officer, this arrangement will ensure that Tobago benefits directly and more equitably from the energy resources within our waters, such as a Calypso field, the Colibri project, the Block 22, the NCMA-4 major gas find by Shell Corporation. Now, this type of revenue share arrangement, Madam Presiding Officer, will deliver billions into the Tobago Offshore Revenue Fund. Madam Presiding Officer, I really want to also bring to this House lessons learned from my recent conversations with the Minister of Finance on another legislation that was recently enacted by Parliament in December 2021, and that is the TTRA, or the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, as I close. Now, the TTRA, when it came into operationalization, when it comes into...
you have 5 minutes.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. If it comes into operationalization in Tobago, for instance, I want to let Tobago understand that this legislation was passed in the House with the, I don't want to call it, I don't know if there are bill papers from Tobago, bill papers with Tobago being the place of birth, but we have representatives in Trinidad representing Tobago East and West that passed a legislation whereby the funds collected in Tobago, that act in Section 22 stated that the fund should be deposited, every single fund should be deposited into the Exchequer Fund and not in the Tobago House of Assembly Fund. Right now, Madam Presiding Officer, under that TTRA arrangement, I have staff who do not have resources, who were not trained into the GenTax system, because the TTRA Act did not have any provisions for anybody in Tobago or nothing related to revenue collection in Tobago. As a matter of fact, I did hear the minority councillor speak to revenues being collected in Trinidad that are really Tobago-based revenues. The Fiscal Review Commission will deal with that. But, Madam Presiding Officer, I have raised that with the minister and nothing was done. By bringing this under the Fiscal Review Commission, I do not see that any change will take place, because the chairman of the Fiscal Review Commission is the same person that I have been speaking to and have done nothing to remedy this situation.
Member, he is raising on a point of order.
Secretary keeps referring to conversations with the minister who's not here to defend himself.
What standing order did you cite?
45.8, the conduct of the president, members of the assembly, members of parliament. She's talking about conversations that the minister isn't here to defend himself.
Continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. So the TTRA provides no role, function, authority for the Tobago Island government over the TTRA in Tobago. And notwithstanding that revenue collection is the first item on the 5th schedule of the Tobago House of Assembly Act of 1996. By Section 26, the TTRA gives the authority to deposit all revenues collected in Tobago to the Exchequer Fund and not to the THA Fund. Operationally, as I did indicate, Madam Presiding Officer, that revenue staff are not trained and they don't have any resources, which leads me to the point that any act that is passed without consideration, consultations, and representations from the people of Tobago is flawed, is fatally flawed, and should be totally rejected by us here in Tobago. In closing, I want to advise and recommend that we as Tobagonians take the required and the necessary time to ensure that Tobago's self-determination, the constitutional amendment bill that promotes and protects our right to self-determination, is one that we pass. And not only when the collective is satisfied and comfortable that our fundamental rights and entitlements are guaranteed, they are protected, they are promoted, subject to changes in the legislation. And Madam Presiding Officer, at that point, that is when we would say, yes, I thank you.
Chair recognizes Assemblyman Hackett. You may now join this debate. No?
Madam Presiding Officer, recognizing that it is 6 minutes after 4:30, as Leader of Assembly Business, I beg to move that this House remains seated until all the business on the order paper are dealt with, and I would then present if you so oblige.
Honorable members, the question is that we remain seated until the business of the day is completed. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. You may now join this debate.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, esteemed members of this august House, residents of the electoral district of Bethesda-Leketo, and members of this community of Tobago, good afternoon to each of you. I rise this afternoon on this terrific Carnival Thursday afternoon to contribute to this crucial debate, recognizing that many speakers before me have underscored the history, the urgency, and the deep aspirations behind Tobago's call to become self-actualized. Our demand, Madam Presiding Officer, is not new. It has been persistent and a just cause that has been the echo for almost 5 decades, from 1977 until today. We seek more than just minor adjustments or administrative reforms, Madam Presiding Officer and the people of Tobago. In fact, we demand true self-determination, and this motion, as amended by the Honorable Deputy Chief Secretary, represents a vital step towards achieving this goal. Madam Presiding Officer, the motion as presented by the minority leader, though cloaked in the language of progress, is laced with subterfuge and mendacity. It is an exercise in duplicity crafted with a sophistry that attempts to obscure the deeper issues at hand. The motion reeks of half-hearted commitments, promising change while retaining the disingenuousness that has plagued our quest to determine our destinies for ourselves. Madam Presiding Officer, it is therefore imperative that we see beyond this facade and address the true statements and substance of our demands for self-determination that is free from deceptive half-truths. Madam Presiding Officer, before I get into it, let me, for elucidation's sake, remind us remind the people of Tobago, remind the people of Trinidad and Tobago how we got here in the first place. It is a known fact that the Tobago House of Assembly is this country's oldest political institution. The THA was first incarnated in 1768 on the islands, or in the islands rather, former capital of Georgetown, which is now Studley Park. The capital moved to Scarborough in 1769, as did the offices of the 13-member elected House of Assembly, which was the lower house, and the appointed Legislative Council, which was the upper house. In 1877, Madam Presiding Officer, representative government was abolished, with the Crown Colony introduced to handle the administration of the island. In 1889, Tobago was joined with Trinidad by the British government. Madam Presiding Officer, our demand for self-determination is therefore not new. It began with the late Honorable A.N.R. Robinson in 1977, who declared before Parliament, Madam Presiding Officer, that the people of Tobago have a right to a meaningful say in their own affairs. Following the 1976 general election, where the PNM lost both parliamentary seats to the Tobago-led DAC, which of course Robinson was a leader at that time, this led to a hostile response from then Prime Minister Dr. Eric Williams, something we're very familiar with in and around December 6, 2021. The Ministry of Tobago Affairs was disbanded, effectively punishing Tobago for not supporting the People's National Movement. In response, Madam Presiding Officer, Robinson, who had become the MP for Tobago East at that time, introduced a motion in the House of Representatives on January 14th, 1977. Listen, the motion in its entirety had a resolution that is very dear to me, and it goes, be it resolved that this Honorable House is of the opinion that all proper and necessary steps should be taken to accord the people of Tobago internal self-government. This motion was seconded by the late Dr. Winston Murray, MP of Tobago West, who spoke passionately about Tobago's cultural preservation and the island's neglect by the central government. But let me stick a pin here to emphasize how vociferous, how passionate, how genuine representatives of this island are when they stand up for the people of Tobago, unattached to the People's National Movement. That was a time when the two Tobago representatives truly served the people of Tobago and not Balizé House. But I digress. Madam Presiding Officer, at that time, the PNM's response was to amend the motion to preserve the concept of their proposed unitary state framework, initiating the thrust for internal self-governance as an attempt at secession. The Honorable Overand Padmore, Minister in the Ministry of Finance, aggressively advanced this narrative, dismissing the legitimate grievances and historical injustices raised by Robinson and Murray. It is within this context that the political warfare between Trinidad and Tobago must be understood. Madam Presiding Officer, it is a deep-seated desire for self-government rooted in a history of colonial and post-colonial neglect, which was further exacerbated by the central government's punitive response to the 1976 election results. Madam Presiding Officer, the introduction of Act 37 in 1980, which re-established, and I'm using that word because I gave you the history of the oldest legislative body being the THA. So re-established the Tobago House of Assembly, and this, of course, was an important step. However, as Dr. Winston Murray noted during the debates, it was only the beginning. Our journey had just begun, and we didn't even know it at that time. It, however, granted administrative powers, but left key areas such as budgetary control, under the centralized power of Port of Spain. When Act 40 of 1996 was passed, Madam Presiding Officer, it was expected to correct these deficiencies by granting Tobago more control over crucial sectors such as education, health, and finance. Yet, the central government continued to control our development funds and legislative authority, leaving this assembly with responsibilities but not the corresponding powers to enact meaningful change. Madam Presiding Officer, self-determination is a recognized human right under international law, and my colleague, Secretary for Tourism, took great pains into explaining what these human rights are. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the international covenants affirm the right of all peoples to determine their political status and to pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Let me repeat that. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the international covenants affirm the right of all peoples to determine their political status and to pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Our pursuit of self-determination, therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, aligns with these principles and reflects a long-standing demand for the ability to govern ourselves in a way that addresses our unique circumstances and our aspirations. Madam Presiding Officer, despite multiple legislative attempts over the years, the central government and most times the PNM-led central government has consistently failed to provide a framework for true self-determination for Tobago. The inadequacy of the 1996 Act was starkly highlighted by the 2015 case, Tobago House of Assembly versus Attorney General, which showed that the Act did not grant us sufficient powers to govern our own affairs effectively. Similarly, Madam Presiding Officer, the 2013 Constitutional Amendment Bill aimed to enhance Tobago's internal self-governance. But, as then Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar herself noted, the goal was to place a substantial part of the responsibility for Tobago's affairs in the hands of its residents. That goal remains largely unrealized to this day. Madam Presiding Officer, the current bills fail to adequately address the issues of Tobago's maritime boundaries, and I'm going to start there. These current bills. Former Chief Secretary, the Honorable Orville London, his 2016 draft called for a 200 nautical mile maritime boundary. Yet the latest legislative proposals do not only neglect PNM Chief Secretary claim, your own former Chief Secretary's claim, but also remove the existing 6 mile boundary from recognition. And we've been bringing it up, it's popping up here, it's popping up there. The point is, you've asked for something, the people of Tobago gave you the opportunity through consultation, lengthy consultation at that. We came up with particulars that were non-negotiable, and still the bill that is being done, or the bills that are being dangled in front of us, have not given us not even half of that. These omissions severely limits Tobago's control over its resources, and it undermines the very fabric of the island's economic potential. For true self-determination to be achieved, Madam Presiding Officer, our territorial waters must be explicitly defined and our rights over them protected. Madam Presiding Officer, it is evident that discussions around autonomy tend to gain traction only around the election periods. It is no coincidence. I feel like we have these conversations in or around. It's almost like you can smell the fact that the election bell is about to ring because the conversations conveniently come up. My colleague, Dr. Faith B. Israel, my colleague, Assemblyman Pollard, my colleague, he's not in the house today, Assemblyman Baines, our Chief Secretary, and Assemblyman Duke, we sat in spaces where right before that December 6th election, we had this dangled in front of us. coming out of major conversations right in that 2020 election where Councillor Boris and Assemblyman Duke were the candidates. And so it's always a political football that comes into this space in or around the election. And, you know, we feel that with the general election and or the THA election impending, they're once again being used as campaign tools rather than being pursued with genuine commitment. Dr. the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley has previously described these efforts, these same efforts, as smoke and mirrors, where the substance of autonomy is sacrificed at the altar of political expediency. And of course, you know, these conversations come when you're in opposition. And then when you're in governance, when you're actually the government and have the opportunity, even at points in time where you're governing both Trinidad and Tobago, you don't see the passion, the fervor, the vigor in actually making it happen. And so this time, the people of Tobago, I'm speaking to you, we must ensure that our right to self-determination is recognized as a fundamental necessity and not an electoral afterthought. Madam Presiding Officer, for Tobago to achieve a true self-determination, a point that has been reiterated over and over in this House, financial equity must be established. The current allocations are insufficient for meaningful development. And Prime Minister Dr. Rowley, and it's strange that I'm quoting him, but he himself highlighted that the share of the national budget allocated to the Assembly is at its minimum. If we are to govern ourselves effectively, we must have the financial resources necessary as an island to make strategic investments according to our needs that are free from restrictive oversight by the central government. Of course, you're in opposition and so you're speaking like this. But Madam Presiding Officer, Tobago's pursuit of autonomy requires legislative power over areas such as what we spoke to. And we have an entire schedule of them, and yet we see all the encroachment happening and everything disguised as ministries will come to Tobago and do X, Y, and Z while our development program is underfunded. We must also have jurisdiction over land management and natural resource exploitation. It was Dr. Eric Williams himself who stated in 1957 that Tobago, as an island detached from Trinidad, cannot simply be equated with any district on mainland Trinidad. His acknowledgement of Tobago's unique status must be reflected in the laws governing our island and in our pursuit of self-determination. The two states, one country model, as expressed by many Tobagonians even in those consultations, presents a viable solution. And I know every time we discuss it, we have the conversation about if it's a marriage, you all want to walk out. We never spoke to federation, if it's federation, but it came up in the consultations. And it is a viable solution for Tobago's self-determination, Madam Presiding Officer, because it acknowledges the island as an equal partner within the Republic. Similar models have been successfully implemented, and I heard my colleagues speaking to it before, in regions such as Scotland and Quebec, where local legislative and executive powers coexist with shared responsibilities at the national level. It is time for Trinidad and Tobago to adopt a governance structure that respects Tobago's autonomy while maintaining the unity of the state. Madam Presiding Officer, allow me to end with a story. I sat here and I listened to my colleagues and I said, you know, sometimes we come in here and of course, being so passionate, we speak the jargon of the intellects and sometimes the layman terms. You have to find a way to break it down where every child, every single parent, the man working on the side of the road, the man who is a barber, you know, everybody can understand the story. And I said, you know what? I am a woman. Let me think of a story that would probably, through my words or through my eyes, explain what I think we're grappling with here. Madam Presiding Officer, let's think about a woman known for her hard work, for her beauty, and for her resourcefulness. She lives on her own, tending to a small piece of land that has been in her family name for generations. She grew sugarcane, fruits, and other crops, and for a long time, her land flourished. Her garden provided more than enough for her to live on and even share with her neighbors. Life was simple, but she was proud of it. She had a way of doing things passed down from her ancestors, and she knew her land like the back of her hand. But over time, Madam Presiding Officer, things changed. The soil wasn't as rich as it used to be. Storms had damaged parts of her garden, and the markets weren't paying as much for her crops as they used to. The world outside her little patch of earth was changing, and it became harder and harder for her to get by. Even though she worked just as hard as always, there simply wasn't enough to keep up with the cost of running her household. So over the years, Madam Presiding Officer, different men tried to take over her land. They saw her hard times as an opportunity to claim what she had, thinking they could manage it better or use the land for their own plans. She had fought off these attempts time and time again. As a matter of fact, about 33 times. Each time, she managed to hold on to her home, but the constant battles left her weary. Eventually, it was decided by others, not her, people she didn't even have a say over, that she should marry a man who lived in a big fancy house nearby. It wasn't a marriage she wanted, Madam Presiding Officer. She was forced into it. But she was told it would bring her stability and help her get back on her feet. Madam Presiding Officer, this man's house was larger and had more resources, and combining their lives was supposed to be the solution for her struggles. But when she moved in, it became clear that things weren't as equal as promised. The man took charge, making decisions about the house and the garden without ever consulting her, when she was still expected to tend to the land, but her efforts now served his plans rather than her own. The little say she had in how things were done was quickly overshadowed by the rules of the larger household, and she soon found herself in a life where her own voice was often ignored. Even with these challenges, Madam Presiding Officer, the woman's spirit remained strong. She knew her land had value beyond crops. It was beautiful with rolling hills, clear streams, and a peaceful atmosphere that couldn't be found anywhere else. As the agricultural work continued to struggle, she started to rely more on inviting guests to come to stay with her. She hosted travelers who came to enjoy the scenery, to explore her natural beauty, and to celebrate the tradition she had kept alive. The festival she held and the hospitality she offered began to sustain her in a different way, turning her home into a place where people could connect with her natural beauty, her rich culture, and her priceless historical artifacts that could be found around her home. Madam Presiding Officer, this new chapter...
Members, if he rises on a point of order, you have to give way. Please. Can I have your point of order?
Relevance, the story been going a while, and I just want to bring it home back to...
Thank you, Minority Leader. Continue.
Madam Presiding Officer, this new chapter helped her to stay afloat, but it was bittersweet. She still longed for the days when she could make decisions about her own life without needing someone else's approval. She didn't want to leave the marriage altogether, but she wanted to be able to manage her part of the household on her terms, to shape the future of her land and her life as she saw fit. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, she continued to speak up, not for separation, at least not yet, but for respect and for balance, for equity, Madam Presiding Officer. She wanted a partnership where her voice was heard, where the knowledge and care she had put into her land was recognized. She knew she could thrive if given the freedom to do things her way, just like she had done before. But it wasn't just about getting by, Madam Presiding Officer. It was about living with dignity, making her own choices and holding on to the traditions that had kept her strong through every struggle. Her story was not just about a difficult marriage, Madam Presiding Officer, but it was about the enduring will to fight for the life she deserved, to find new ways of doing things, and to never lose sight of who she was. Madam Presiding Officer, and even today as I end, I want Tobago to understand that it's currently at crossroads in its marriage with Trinidad. And just like the woman in my story, Madam Presiding Officer, Tobago's voice deserves to be heard, her contributions recognized, and her autonomy respected within this union. This is not about separation, at least not yet, Madam Presiding Officer, but about redefining the partnership, the marriage, rather, to honor both parties' strengths and histories. For true unity cannot be achieved by control or imposed decisions. It must be built on mutual respect, Madam Presiding Officer, where both Tobago and Trinidad can flourish together, each with the freedom to shape its own destiny while still moving forward as one nation. The time has come for Tobago to not just follow the path set by another, but to walk beside her partner, equal in voice and power, steering her own course towards a shared, dignified future. And Madam Presiding Officer, as I close, the current bills before us offer incremental changes, changes that have been long-standing, but they are not sufficient to meet Tobago's demands. We require comprehensive legislative powers, financial equity, and clearly defined territorial rights. The people of Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer, have waited for far too long for the realization of our right to self-determination. And so at this juncture, let us ensure that this moment is not lost to superficial gestures. The call for true self-determination is now louder than ever, and we must respond with resolve and action. I thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Recognize Assemblyman Morris. You may now conclude this debate.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And while I listened to the long-winded story of the woman, the only part of the story I believe my colleague from Bethesda omitted is the part where this man, realizing that the woman was vulnerable, promised her everything. Sweet-talked her, told her he could change her life, he could fix things, he could fix this. And when the woman decided to finally give that man a chance, what she realized is that he was all talk and no action. Madam Presiding Officer, and this is, Madam Presiding Officer, and this is the current reality of Tobago, where you have some folks who came to the electorate telling the electorate, we will fix this, we'll fix your roads, we'll fix your problems. And when Tobagonians decided to give them a chance, what Tobagonians have come to realize is that they really can't fix nothing. Not even this bill today. We're supposed to be having a conversation, Madam Presiding Officer. And you see what is happening, and I guess these members believe, because if you reach a party late, you're supposed to start over the party. Not realizing that this process is a process that started in 2007, culminating in 2016 with the Tobago Constitution Amendment to Self-Government Bill. And this bill is a bill that that emanated from a forum in Signal Hill where a wide cross-section of Tobagonians gathered after numerous consultations from the political forum of political parties. I remember being in Trinidad at UE as well. So the conversations weren't just held in Tobago. They were held across the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. And after pulling together all the views, different recommendations were put to a vote at Signal Hill, the Signal Hill Accord. And it is from those agreed positions that the legal framework was put into place. And that legal framework came to the House, was debated, approved, transmitted to the Parliament, to the cabinet. The cabinet took that very same bill, laid it in the parliament. The parliament now sent it to a joint select committee, and I continue to hear my colleagues saying the PNM, the PNM, PN. And I took my time to explain to them that these two pieces of legislation is not the work of the PNM, it is the work of a joint select committee of the parliament. That is members of the government, members of the opposition, and independent senator, including Dr. Remy. So if you're saying the bills are anti-Tobago, the bill's not good, you're also saying persons of the independent-minded Dr. Remy also is against Tobago. And that is the point. Madam Presiding Officer, you would think that the discussions would emanate from what Tobago approved and sent down, and then you take, because you're basically, this is what is on the table, then you look to see what did we send down and what did we get back, and are there any variance between what we said as Tobagonians we wanted, because I'm hearing all kind of new conversation. The conversation about federalism was on the table and that was rejected. The conversation about independence was on the table and that was rejected. What Tobagonians agreed is that we want a devolved relationship where there's the central government of Trinidad and Tobago, and we have our self-government within the Union of Trinidad and Tobago. That was the agreed position. So how you all are coming now trying to reinvent the wheel? I hear the Secretary of Finance foisting on this House an arrangement that is crafted in federalism from Canada. When we have a devolved arrangement, you hear people saying, well, our law should supersede the central government, when the central government, and I want people to understand, it is not the central government of Trinidad. It is the central government of Trinidad and Tobago. So this, I hear people talking about who are 50% and who are 50%. Those conversations starts when you plan to leave a relationship. And if this, as I keep asking my colleagues, if your position is to secede, simply tell Tobagonians that you want to secede. Because if my wife starts telling me, well, this is my 50 and this is your 50, I get worried, innit? So I hear one member talking about his 50 and Trinidad. So I am worried now as a Tobagonian. Is it that we're going to secede? And is that something you all will be putting to the electorate of Tobago in a couple months? Because it seemed to me that you all are laying the foundation for a discussion on secession. As I sat here, that is what I interpreted, because the foundation of this debate today should have been these bills that all of us in Tobago participated in, approved in this House, sent to the cabinet, was laid in the parliament, reviewed by a GSC, and came back into us in the form of two pieces of legislation which we all got an opportunity to view. Many of you participated in those post-consultation. Many of you had your say. Some of what you said was adopted and included. And the fact is, when you are in a relationship and the focus is to preserve the union, there will be some level of compromise and negotiation. Any kind of relationship, whether it's a marriage, a friendship, any kind of partnership, business and all, if the goal is to stay together, then ultimately you will understand that some things that you ask for, you may not get it in the way you envisage. So for instance, and I hear they keep referencing this 200 nautical miles and trying to put it on the shoulders of Mr. London. Mr. London don't own these bills. These bills came out from a process from the forum of political parties. This was Tobagonians working together. And this is why I kept reminding them that Madam Presiding, this is why I keep reminding my colleagues, when we stand together, we go far. When we stand disunited, we stay stagnated. And therefore, the whole essence of this is that, look, you are saying that, and they continue to misinform, Madam Presiding Officer, a lot of misinformation. They're telling Tobagonians, well, we should reject the bills because the bill we sent down had 200 nautical miles. Madam Presiding Officer, I have the bills as sent to Parliament. And I'm reading from section, from clause 4, section 1 of the Constitution is amended by, and it says 2A, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago shall comprise the land of Trinidad and the island of Tobago and other islands of the archipelago that are enclosed landward of the archipelagic baselines as well as the archipelagic waters. The 12-mile territorial sea, and including the seabed and subsoil situated beneath the territorial sea of Trinidad and Tobago and their super adjacent airspaces. So here we are, making noise about miles, and the bills we sent spoke to 12 nautical miles. The bills we got speak to 11 nautical miles. So all you have is a difference of 1 nautical mile, and you're going to refuse and reject, as we are being told today, a bill that allows you lawmaking powers, 6.8% in confirmed, enshrined minimum budgetary allocation, Fiscal Review Commission that can give you more and ensure your tax collection systems, both what you, in terms of what you could now get and accounted for persons paying taxes in Trinidad. All that is in there. The ability to borrow without the minister unreasonably withholding. The ability to invest. So you are telling Tobagonians, just for 1 nautical miles, reject. And it's the same thing I'm hearing about 6.8 and 6.9. You never get 6.9 in the history of the THA Act, though it says that is the ceiling, the upper limit. But yet you are getting guaranteed 6.8 and you're saying that's enough. And you know what makes it even more ridiculous? We came here just last month, whining and grinding and fussing, begging to get 5.8, and the bill guarantees you 6.8. But now you're saying that's not enough. What all you really want? Because if you're saying 5.8% of the national budget is sufficient to treat with your management needs of the island, and you are getting even more, then what is the problem? No, but if you want to beg when you can get it guaranteed, I don't know who in their right mind will get something guaranteed and prefer to beg free. I don't understand it, and especially knowing that you never get it before. Madam Presiding Officer, so as I wrap up, and I just wanted to take, really treat with some of the misinformation, and it's deliberate. They are deliberately spreading misinformation in the space. And I must express my disappointment in what we have witnessed today. It is clear to me that the majority of those who stood against these bills, they have not even taken the time to read and understand the legislation before us. Instead, they have come armed with misinformation and disinformation. For instance, as I said, one speaker talked about 0 miles. Which part in this bill or pieces of legislation refer to no miles? When it clearly tells you from the shoreline to a point 11 nautical miles, you have complete administrative powers in those areas. So when I hear people talking about the tourism secretary talking about, well, she can regulate, where the Boko Marine Park is that beyond the 11 nautical miles? And you know, we move from the ridiculous sometimes, because you would think there's something out there that when you on a boat or something and you're passing, it says you're in Tobago. Yeah, this is 11 nautical miles here for Tobago, and the rest is Trinidad. We don't define ourselves like that in Trinidad and Tobago. We defined ourselves as Trinidad and Tobagonians within the maritime space that is Trinidad and Tobago. Why are you all so busy wanting to separate the islands? You all don't separate all yourself from PDP. All you want to separate Tobago from Trinidad as well? All you separatists. That's what all you about. Look, Watson, you are nice.
Assemblyman
position.
Morris, be mindful of your words, please.
I think. Madam Presiding Officer, and you know, there has been a familiar tactic today. You know, this is an administration that blames everybody but themselves. Just recently, my colleague, the Chief Secretary, got himself in hot waters because rather than taking responsibility for Tobago's crime challenges, he was busy blaming mothers. And today again, you see the secretaries and the representatives coming in this house, and for every challenge, they are there blaming, telling you it's the central government. Imagine the person who is responsible for bringing international direct flights to Tobago is telling you that Trinidad are not doing enough to market Tobago. So what is your job? What is the job of TTAL? That is what you said. You said that Trinidad, you will have an airport, and Trinidad has not put the systems in place. Blaming Trinidad.
State that I'm blaming Trinidad for lack of marketing of the destination. I never said those words. So I think the member needs to withdraw. Thank you.
You said you spoke to Trinidad. Yes.
If it wasn't said, please retract and move on, please.
Madam Presiding Officer, I retract, except that the Secretary was clear to indicate that the Prime Minister should be, well, I guess you want him to, in addition to bringing Marriott, a mega project, after they were part of the coup that run Sanders, and after the Prime Minister go out and attract another mega hotel, you are still asking the Prime Minister to go and do more. What are you doing for yourself? You are the one asking what they're going to do to put in the space to go with the airport. Well, you talk about a marina. The government is doing the macro, and it is upon you to do the micro. Where is your development of sites and attractions? Where is the strategic plan that we've been asking about? Where is...
Assemblyman Morris, you can continue with your presentation.
Madam Presiding Officer, what I find even more troubling is that this administration, as I said, they don't want to take any responsibility, and it makes for good politics. So perhaps they like how things are, because I see for all the complaint, they complain about the inadequacies of the very THA Act of Act 40 of 1996. They seem very, very comfortable rejecting this bill in preference for that, because Mr. Sampson is on record as saying these bills, which afford even more than anything you could imagine, is worse than Act 40 of 1996. And perhaps the reason why they like Act 40 of 1996 is because it provides them with a plausible excuse to hide their incompetency. And because they could sell a story as to the central government of Trinidad and Tobago don't like we, and play on the emotions of Tobagonians, perhaps that is why they are so comfortable to reject these bills. What I find even more troubling, Madam Presiding Officer, is that this administration, as I said, seems to be laying the groundwork for secession under the guise of autonomy. Madam Presiding Officer, this is the same group that rode in as PDP and then cut ties with that party. They are applying the same playbook here, creating division while claiming to stand for unity and for Tobago. We see the seeds of separation being planted when we should be fostering closer ties within the framework of self-governance. But the confusion doesn't stop there, now, Madam Presiding Officer, because we've heard different members of this administration speak from entirely different sides of their mouths. The Chief Secretary himself recently said that the bills are good bills, but they just need minor adjustments. But today, we heard the Deputy Chief Secretary saying some parts are the bills, some parts are good, but it needs major amendments. So you move from minor to major and to reject the bill. And another member says outright that nothing in the bill is good. I think it was the Secretary of Infrastructure. Say the only thing must be good is the 6.8. And he even went on to say, well, we're not even sure of getting 6.8. So,
clarification, Madam Presiding Officer. I think the member is...
Point of clarification.
Point of clarification. My error. I hear the member indicating that I have stated things that I am sure I did not state before, even in the sitting today, so I will ask that he be very careful and probably retract some of that.
some of what?
I'm just going to advise to not say things that members did not say.
Madam Presiding Officer, I am simply repeating what I heard, and I sure I heard the member indicating that the bills need adjustments. And in fact, even the amendment that she made is there saying that it needs necessary amendments. So I'm not saying what she said. Anyways, I'll move on, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, so which one is it? Is it that the bills are good and you really want to work to genuinely make it better? Or is it an outright rejection? Because I heard in one breath here today, clear outright rejection of the bill. But when you look at the amendment in the motion, the only thing they seem to have a slight issue with is that it should not be accepted without amendments. So there's some disconnect, and I don't know if that is symptomatic and symbolic of what is happening amongst the 14 or 15 independents, because there seems to be a lot of disconnect and dissonance today. But Madam Presiding Officer, the Tobago Amendment bills and the two other pieces of legislation are properly aligned to deliver greater autonomy for our island. Yet no one, well, with the exception of perhaps the attempt from the Secretary of Finance, very few amendments or recommendations were proposed that address the real substance of what's before us. It seems to me that the members opposite, they are more interested in stalling, in rejecting outright, rather than engaging in constructive debate to refine these bills. And Madam Presiding Officer, we were so magnanimous. I gave credit where credit was due. I highlighted the achievements of persons like Arthur Napoleon Raymond Robinson. Once a PNM turned and went his way. I highlighted the contribution of the late Hotoi Charles. But when was their turn to talk, they behaved like no PNM ever made any contribution to the autonomy discussion and process, which is quite disingenuous, because ultimately we all should see ourselves as Tobagonians first. Look, today I looked through some recognition, and you know what was clear in those recognition? That the people they were celebrating, not one of those persons identified publicly with the PNM. And it says to me, is this the Tobago within an autonomous framework that we want to create, where there's division on one side as opposed to the next? Because we saw it in how they approached governance from day one, where they came in, and right away, if you looked like a PNM, you were unworthy of employment. And therefore, as we speak autonomy, we have to consider that We are doing this for all of Tobago, not for one side as opposed to the other. Madam Presiding Officer, we are at a crossroads. This is the moment for us to take that decisive step forward. Because, you know, what is the alternative, Madam Presiding Officer? All right, I'm hearing all the conversation about it not ready, but what is the alternative? What is the plan? Will we sit back and wait another 10 or 20 years for another chance? Because some of the discussions we're having are new proposals. And does that mean we have to go back to the people of Tobago all again and restart the process? Because I want us to do some introspection. Just imagine if our framers, who stood the test of time and accepted the small gains of creating the Tobago House of Assembly, if they were thinking like you all today, because I'm not thinking like that, if they were thinking like those on that side, do you think we would have gotten the Tobago House of Assembly? Because they understood that to get to a destination, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And therefore they understood, even though Mr. Robinson, he had a dream of what the full autonomy dream would be. But he understood that sometimes you just have to run your part and put the baton on to somebody. It's a relay and a continuum towards a journey, towards an end. And therefore, it doesn't mean that because you don't get everything, you throw down the baton or you kick the bucket down the road. And therefore, if, again, when it came to Act 40 of 1996, that we all are saying is inadequate, if they too were to take the position that if it's not perfect, we don't want it, then where would we have been? We would have still been in 1980 Act, where they don't even have a chief secretary, they didn't even have an administrator, you barely had a proper office, and therefore these bills, if you are to be quite honest, when you do and look at what we require to treat with Tobago's needs at this time, these bills provide you with the systems, the legal framework, and the resources to get Tobago moving. They do, because they give you the resources, 6.8%, almost $4 billion. That means jobs for people who can't get jobs. That means that all the roads that you can't get fixed, you could fix your roads. It speaks to the Fiscal Review Commission and all the added benefits. It speaks to the ability to make laws for the things that we want to treat with right here. Because all the fishery thing I hear my colleague for food security talk about, within the 11 nautical miles, you can make laws and you can manage that space. Nobody could tell you how to manage that space. So, Madam Presiding Officer, I want to return to the story of the two travelers. One sought perfection but remained stagnant, never moving forward, while the other took a decisive leap forward, understanding that progress often requires compromise. My fellow Tobagoans, we stand here today as those travelers. Do we remain stuck, waiting for the perfect opportunity that may never come? Or do we take the leap and embrace the opportunities these bills offer? I want to suggest to Tobagoans, let's not gamble with our future. We have two bills that guarantees us fundamental benefits and advanced benefits from what we currently enjoy. And therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, time is of the essence. These bills provide a superior opportunity for Tobago, greater financial resources, a stronger legal framework, more control over our destiny. To reject them now or signal that we are not happy with them would be a travesty, because that is the legs that the UNC wants to run. And the question is, I have to ask, whose bidding are you all really doing here today? Is it the bidding and the interests of the people of Tobago in ensuring they get more? Or is it the bidding of your friends in Trinidad, the Yellow Brigade? Madam Presiding Officer, as the Chief Secretary himself
Assemblyman
said,
Morris.
I asked a question.
Assemblyman Morris, your inferences,
No, asking a question, Madam.
it's very heavy. Retract and move forward, please.
All right, I'm almost done, Madam Presiding Officer. So, as the Chief Secretary himself said, these are good bills. Your leader said the bills are good bills. And we cannot let minor disagreements, like a 0.1% and a 1 nautical mile, rob us of this chance. As I close, I urge all members of this House and the people of Tobago to reflect on the words of the late Hotoy Charles, who said, "The day Tobago unites is the day Tobago wins." These bills offer us the opportunity to unite, to win, and build a brighter future for Tobago. Let history record this moment as the day we stood together for Tobago's self-government. I so move and I so thank you.
Honorable members, before the House votes on the amended motion, I must put the proposed amendments to the House as they were proposed. First amendment to the third recital, propose leaving out the word 3 and insert the word 5. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? Amendment carried. Second amendment to the fourth recital, the words proposed, bills to grant Tobago the long-denied autonomy will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament, be inserted after the word that and the words Constitution, Amendment, Self-Government, Tobago Self-Government be left out. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any against, say nay. The ayes have it, amendment carried. Third amendment to the fifth recital, propose to insert the word should before the word represent. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any against, say nay. Amendment carried. Fourth amendment, at the last resolution, propose to insert the words with necessary amendments and leave out the words without further amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against say nay. Amendment carried. Now the amendment proposed by the minority. Honorable members, the question put is that the motion be amended by inserting the word delay after further at the resolution, at the last resolution of the motion, leaving out the word amendment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any against, say nay. Amendment denied. Members, the amendments are carried. I will now put the amended motion to the House. Honorable members, the amended motion put is that, whereas the Tobago House of Assembly, THA, is constitutionally mandated to govern and manage the affairs of Tobago in accordance with Act 40 of 1996. And whereas Act 40 of 1996 provided enhanced authority to the Tobago House of Assembly, its provisions have not yet delivered the full level of autonomy sought by Tobagonians. And whereas for over 5 decades, successive efforts to achieve consensus, both within and outside Parliament, have failed to secure the passage of bills that would grant Tobago the desired autonomy. And whereas the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has announced that the bills to grant Tobago the long-denied autonomy will soon be debated and put to a vote in Parliament, and whereas these bills should represent a historic step forward, proposes substantive improvement to the Tobago's autonomy and authority, including the establishment of the Tobago Legislature and the entrenchment of core provisions for Tobago's self-governance. Be it resolved that this House acknowledges the provisions of these bills should have Be it resolved that this House acknowledges that the provisions of these bills should have far-reaching and positive impacts on the powers of the Tobago House of Assembly and the quality of life for all Tobagonians. Be it further resolved that this House unequivocally supports the swift passage of these bills into law, recognizing that any further delay would perpetuate the long-standing disenfranchisement of the people of Tobago. And be it further resolved that this House encourages all necessary actions to ensure the passage of appropriate bills, including an urgent bipartisan meeting between members of the Tobago House of Assembly and Parliament to facilitate their smooth and timely enactment with the necessary amendments. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Amended motion is carried.
Motion for adjournment.
Leader of Assembly Business.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I beg to move that this House now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Honorable members, the question is that this House now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? The ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed. Good afternoon, members. Please have a safe and enjoyable carnival.